I've always had such a deep fascination with content that was cut from Halo games. Honestly, I feel like at this point, I'm more familiar with content that was cut from the original Halo trilogy than I am with my own sense of self. Reach, however, not so much. Out of pure curiosity, I recently found myself going down the rabbit hole of Reach cut content for the first time ever, actually, and what I found surprised me so much that I ended up turning that late night deep dive into this very video. And of course, I want to start out by looking at the earliest original plans that Bungie had for Reach's campaign, which, when compared to what we ultimately got, are absolutely fascinating. So this image, shared by Marcus Leto, is the earliest known plan for Reach's campaign, broken down level by level in chronological order. And although this is very much a kind of general overview that lacks some specifics, I do find it interesting that in this rather different version of the campaign, it still had 11 levels like the one that we ended up getting. And then, in addition to this document, Marcus also shared a couple others from the exact same point in development. So, let's add them all together and try and build a picture of the earliest version of Reach's story. So, instead of the game opening with Noble Actual, of course the cutscene that formally introduced us to Noble Team, it would have opened with a cinematic of a Marine, likely post-war, recalling back to events just before the last Great War began, specifically pertaining to some sort of mysterious pivotal thing with which he was involved. Now I gotta say, at face value, this sounds really similar to the extra videos that Bungie created for the Halo 3 Believe campaign, which focused on veterans of the Human Covenant War many years in the future, revisiting technology and the sites of battles from the war that they fought in a very kind of Vietnam documentary style. Those videos were extremely impactful, and so I feel like this cutscene might have been as well. I'm also pretty sure that that mysterious pivotal thing would have been Cortana, or at least some kind of foreigner data gathered from the ship. I mean, literally, what else could it have been? The foreigner staff? Okay, well, we'll get into that thing later on. It's also worth noting that at this point, Reach was referred to as the Last Great War, and it was said to be a battle that lasted for 9 months instead of the 37 days that it lasted in Reach, and also instead of the, mere hours that it lasted in the Fall of Reach. Suffice to say, Bungie had quite a few different ideas when it came to the timeline of the Battle of Reach. The first actual level, nicknamed Opening Infantry Battle, sounds a little bit similar to Winter Contingency, given that it was said to include communications of some sort, which of course is similar to the Visegrad relay station going offline, but it does sound like this was meant to be way more of a tutorial level, given the other 2 bullet points for it are training and squad training, which does make me wonder if some kind of Republic Commando squad mechanics were intended to be in Reach at one point. I also assume that at some point during this level, likely in its intro cutscene, we would have gotten this kind of Noble Actual style introduction to Noble Team. I mean, from that intro cinematic, you could, I guess, make the argument that Bungie originally intended for you to play as a Marine in Reach, but we know from the recent dig site leaks, which unfortunately I can't show, and also from various other sources that playing as a unique squad of Spartans was pretty much the plan with Reach from the get-go. The second level seems pretty different to Oni Sword Base because, for starters, it didn't take place at Oni Sword Base, nor did it take place at any Oni or UNSC facility for that matter. Rather, it was a frantic opening battle, seat of your pants terror, in a small coastal city with lots of civilians that was said to be more of an experience than combat. Now, it's pretty obvious that this concept later morphed into Exodus, because of course a coastal city with loads of civilians is literally what Exodus was, and hell, those suicide grunts in Exodus, they are quite literally, quote, seat of your pants terror. You were also meant to regroup and plan an attack, whatever that means in this level, and there was meant to be yet more infantry and weapon training that happened in a small town. Mission 3 was very different. So instead of Nightfall, it was meant to be a ground vehicle training level with wide open combat in a valley between mountains that ultimately resulted in a UNSC victory. Now, Reach never really had any combat like this, at least any open combat akin to, say, the Ark from Halo 3, for example. So I wonder if this idea was eventually kind of distilled down into Tip of the Spear, specifically its intro. Mission 4 was very different, and it was designed around a prototype style of gameplay that Bungie never nailed down, but that all these years later I'm still waiting for: water combat. The level was codenamed Covert SEALs Boat Attack, in which you'd undergo covert training, whatever that means, and then, in the dead of night, assault a Covenant ship offshore. Of course, a water-based ship, in a Navy SEALs-like fashion via your own boat, and then sink it. Needless to say, this sounds so awesome, especially the Navy SEALs style approach. I really do hope at some point water combat finally gets added to Halo, because I'd love to see boat combat and, honestly, even like swimming become core mechanics of the franchise. Level 5 was supposed to just be an intro to air combat, and it does sound pretty simple. You'd clear out an area from above, creating a safe route for supplies, presumably into the city from the second level. Level 6, however, sounds like Nightfall on steroids. Codenamed Sniper Training, it took place on a high ridge, just like Nightfall, except your objective was to take out Covenant leadership targets up in a ridge pass, which sounds really vibey. Any kind of assassination level is always up my alley, and you know, when it takes place in a high up ridge pass in the dead of night with a sniper, man, sign me up. Level 7 sounds very similar to the intro to Oni Alpha Site in ODST. A bridge spanning a canyon is under heavy Covenant assault. This bridge formed a crucial part of a supply route to a resupply station, and so, at dusk, you'd hold the line armed with heavy weapons and explosives and defend the bridge. So yeah, sounds like a cross between the intro to Oni Alpha Site and also the middle section of Tip of the Spear. Level 8, aptly codenamed Low Orbit Aerial Platform Attack, seems like a very early and frankly nowhere near as cool concept of Long Night of Solace. So the level plan was simply to defend a low orbit aerial platform from destruction whilst flying around a massive Covenant ship, dogfighting, and then eventually taking down said massive Covenant ship. Fighting around what sounds like a variant of the orbital defense platforms that we saw in Halo 2 does sound really cool, but come on, raiding a Corvette after dogfighting around it and sending it on a collision course into a supercarrier with a makeshift slipspace bomb on board is just a billion times cooler than this. Level 9, Storm the City, kinda sounds like Exodus on steroids. So, as the name implies, it was once again set in a city, but this time with the urban combat dialed up to 11. Rockets would be blasting out of windows, with paper, glass, and office furniture raining down from the high-rises above. You'd play through the buildings, up to the upper levels for sniping down to more open areas, and then in the streets there'd be loads of destroyed and also partially functional vehicles for, and I quote Marcus, cover and fun. Which kinda makes me wonder if the legendary cut Halo 2 Uber chassis would have finally made its grand debut here. The objective of this level was rather simple, simply take back a portion of the city. Now I've been dying for more urban combat in Halo for years. I mean, we really haven't had any at all since Reach, and even then in Reach it was kinda brief. But this sounds like exactly the kind of gameplay that I'm craving. Maybe one day. The penultimate level seemingly had two different versions in this draft, both taking place at night and both revolving around the concept of assaulting a massive Covenant ship of some kind of variety, but not any kind of ship that we're used to. So the first version had you assaulting a huge Covenant ship at sea, a moving ship that we'd board and sink, and whilst we're on it, it'd slowly sink and pitch throughout the mission, which sounds pretty cool. I gotta say, the physics implications of that are really dope. And then the other version had us assaulting massive Covenant hover ships that hover low off the ground. We'd race around them on smaller craft before entering and destroying one from within, kinda like a Scarab but on steroids. Marcus also highlighted the importance of having activity from other operations visible off in the distance, because they really wanted to drive home the idea that the war on Reach was far bigger than just what you were doing. This version does sound cool, but I'm just so drawn to the idea of water combat in Halo that the first version is just right up my alley. And then, the final level, as is becoming a little bit of a trend with this concept, sounds like Lone Wolf, but on steroids once again. Simply codenamed Last Great Battle, it took place in the afternoon and was exactly what the name implies. You'd fight off against wave after wave of different forces in a huge battle, and would even face off with Covenant walkers too. Now, FYI, these walkers aren't scarabs, they're an entirely separate Covenant entity that we're going to come to later. In this encounter, you'd blast the walkers to bits with artillery guns, while also being able to drive them yourself. Not gonna lie, this artillery gun standoff section does sound pretty similar to the Mac gun standoff at the end of Pillar of Autumn. However, the outcome of this last great battle isn't what you'd expect. The Allies would actually reign victorious, but even still, the UNSC top brass would make the call to abandon Reach to protect the Forerunner artifact, presumably the coordinates to Halo, so we could travel there and inherit our ancient birthright and reclaim that which our Forerunners left behind. This abandonment would of course result in the Covenant glassing the entire planet. And I gotta say, this is a very interesting alternate ending for Reach, seeing as in the regular canon, the Pillar of Autumn essentially had to flee the planet because the top brass knew that the entire thing was doomed. I do wonder how they would have been able to rationalize that in this alternate timeline. Suffice to say, Bungie's earliest concept for Reach's campaign was pretty different to what they locked down in the end. I do find it really interesting that there's no mention of the Pillar of Autumn at all in it, but that said, there's also no mention of the Forerunner artifact until right at the end when it said that it was evac from the planet, so I assume that was just because of how early and detail-light this draft was. Either way, intense urban combat and water-based combat are things that I would kill for in a future Halo game. But the version of Reach's campaign that we ultimately got had some really cool stuff cut as well, and some of it was seemingly cut really late into development. Starting out on Winter Contingency, June's Falcon was actually meant to get shot down, which would have led to a very Black Hawk Down-esque segment for the level. Based on cut dialogue, it seems that right after you first engage the Covenant on the farm, the Banshees that show up were meant to shoot June's Overwatch Falcon down. The pilot would die in the crash, but of course June would radio in from the wreckage and tell you that he's still alive, and then you and Carter would split off from the rest of Noble Team to go and rescue him. As you get closer, June radios in that the Covenant are closing in on his position, and then when you arrive, you clear them out, save June, and then Falcon Charlie 2 comes in for evac. It's only a small segment, but I kind of feel like something that's so Black Hawk Down, like this would have really fit the tone of Reach's story. Now, one of the most disappointing omissions from Reach was, of course, the Scarab fights. They were hands down the highlight of Halo 3, and for some reason, Reach had none. In fact, it had worse than none. It had one encounter that was literally just Bungie blueballing us. However, that wasn't always the case. Tip of the Spear was meant to include the first of Reach's originally plentiful Scarab encounters, which was meant to take place during the on-rails Falcon section through the canyon. The only info we have regarding this fight comes from some cut dialogue, which does seem pretty comprehensive.
Warning. Scans indicate a Scarab mobile assault platform.
You heard her, Noble. Engage with caution.
Bit late for that.
Only intel suggests the Scarab's armor is weakest to the rear.
Roger that. Hit it on the back side, Noble.
Unfortunately, the only Scarab that we ended up getting on Tip of the Spear was an LOD version off in the distance in the background, which, okay, granted, was part of that really cool vignette where the Grafton moves in for a bombing run and a flotilla of longswords bomb the Lance off in the distance. Really, really cool. I gotta say, I fanboy whenever I see this, but as cool as this little section is, it doesn't come close to actually taking one down yourself. That said though, Reach's coolest Scarab encounter is yet to come. But before we get to it, there's just one little segment that was cut from Long Night of Solace that I've got to mention solely for nostalgia's sake. So, instead of the Ardent Prayer's comms relay being taken out by the damage that we do to it in space, instead you originally had to disable it manually from within the ship, and the way that you did it was a very cool little Combat Evolved reference. So, when you reached the ship's comm center, you had to step into the transmission beam to cause your shields to discharge, which overloaded the system, disrupted the relay, and took the comms offline, which is very clearly a reference to stepping into the phase pulse generator in 2 Betrayals in Halo 1. Yeah, it's a small detail, but I'm a sucker for small details, and when I saw this, I knew I had to just give it a mention. Now, Exodus may have been through several early iterations before becoming the level that we eventually got, but even when it became the level that we got, it still had some really awesome stuff cut. First of all, it seems as though in your crash back down to Reach, your visor would get cracked or smashed because there's loads of cut marine dialogue where they talk about fixing and repairing it.
I can repair that visor for you, Lieutenant.
Trouble with your visor, Spartan? I can take care of that for you.
Spartan, want me to do a quick fix on that visor?
All done, Lieutenant. Good hunting.
And I do wonder why this was cut. I think playing through the first third of Exodus with a cracked visor would have been really cool, but then again, the more I think about it, maybe they wanted to save that kind of feature for maximum impact during Lone Wolf. It probably wouldn't have felt as crazy seeing your visor crack at the end of the game had it already happened earlier on. I think seeing it crack for the first time on Lone Wolf is such a surreal experience, and had that already happened, it wouldn't have had the same impact. But hands down, the coolest bit of content that we lost on Exodus was an encounter that Bungie planned during the final section on the island when you're protecting the civilian evacuation. So remember the big ocean that island steeps into? Well, by the sounds of it, scarabs were meant to emerge out of that ocean onto the beach and storm the island, and over the comms, you'd hear Falcon pilots scrambling to circle them and gun them down. And I assume that you would join up with them and destroy their cores to bring the beast down as well. And I gotta wonder, you remember that scarab encounter in Halo Wars 2, the really awesome fight where the banished scarab emerges from the ocean? Well, I wonder if that was inspired by this cut encounter. It seems like such a specific way to introduce a scarab, so I feel like it's gotta be. Either way though, inspired or not, I love how stylized that encounter was in Halo Wars 2, and I can only imagine how much more awesome it would have been in Reach as you watch this hulking beast of a machine emerge from the ocean in first person. Man, someone has gotta find a way to recreate this encounter. But arguably the biggest scarab-related encounter that was cut was on New Alexandria, but it's not the kind of encounter that you might be expecting. So in Halo 3, the level Cortana was originally going to involve a section where you actually got to pilot a scarab and fight through the infested city in it, even going as far as using it to destroy the Gravemind in a boss fight. But sadly, that was cut, and clearly Bungie were quite pissed about that because they tried to do a similar thing again in New Alexandria. Originally, New Alexandria would have been you piloting a scarab to cross the fully glassed terrain of the city. First, you'd hijack it, and then you could fully control it and move across parts of the city's edges. They even had a working prototype of a player-controlled scarab and even a mock-up of the city as well, and apparently the physics when you annihilated Covenant with the beam were awesome. But sadly, they had to cut it due to fears about how sustainable of an experience it was for any length of time, and also its extreme memory cost. New Alexandria then, of course, ended up becoming a Falcon-based Guardian Forest 2.0 after this version was cut. But mark my words, one day we are going to get a Halo game with a drivable scarab. Mark my words. And on the topic of scarabs, Reach had some really interesting and frankly just weird cut vehicles. Starting out with the Covenant Walker, which was only ever seen in 2 pieces of concept art, but as we covered earlier, had an entire section of the final level of the original campaign dedicated to it. Now, this thing really reminds me of a Covenant version of the geckos from MGS4. Isaac Hannaford, the concept artist who first visualized the Walker, intended for you to be able to knock it over by ramming it with a warthog, which I gotta say does sound pretty fun. But of course, it never went anywhere. And similarly, there was a huge Covenant siege engine that was cut from Reach as well, the Draugr. Except this thing is actually now officially canon, which is pretty cool. Also originally designed by Isaac Hannaford, the Draugr was intended to be part of the 10th level of Reach's original campaign, where you take out huge Covenant hover platforms. Those hover platforms were the Draugrs. This thing looks really similar to Skynet's Hunter-Killer tank from, of course, Terminator, which Isaac Hannaford confirmed was of no coincidence. It also seems as though the Draugr was meant to make an appearance during the huge battle at the start of Tip of the Spear as well, and you know, I gotta say, seeing them move towards you on the horizon is pretty ominous. They have quite a terrifying silhouette. Now, what if I told you that Reach was originally intended to have, and I promise I'm not joking, Flying jackals. Well, there existed a vehicle of sorts called the Jackal Glider that apparently had a pretty advanced physics model compared to the other aerial vehicles in the game, even containing data for wings, a tail, rudders, drag, and a few other metrics as well. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I cannot imagine how intimidating it would have been to see a jackal with wings flying towards you. Ooh, makes me shudder down to my very skeleton. Now, arguably the most iconic Reach cut vehicle was of course the motorboat, the Warthog of the Seas. Reach's concepts for water combat look so good, and I really do hope that one day they actually get realised. But for now, all we can do is rewatch this very low quality footage where Bungie showed off their progress on it all the way back in 2010, and also stare at Isaac Hannaford's glorious concept art of said motorboat. One day. Now, just a very brief mention of this one of Isaac Hannaford's early concept arts for the Sabre has now been canonised as a slightly different ship, called the Pegasus, and I just figured it was worth mentioning, solely because it's been canonised. I gotta say, I do love that edgy black and red paint job though. And finally, we have the most fleshed out cut vehicle that has actually now been partially restored by the dig site team, the APC. And funnily enough, this thing was supposed to have a very similar lockdown mechanic to the one that we saw for the Cobra in Halo Wars. It went through several renamings during development, starting out as the Wolverine, then later becoming the Kodiak, which, ironically, are both vehicles that now exist thanks to Halo Wars. The armament of this thing also seems to change with every bit of concept art, but I gotta say, every iteration does look pretty badass. Thankfully, it was half realised in Halo Wars 2 with the Mastodon APC, which does look pretty similar to it. You know, if we ever do get a Battlefield-esque large-scale Halo game, I feel like a vehicle like this would be an awesome team-based inclusion. Okay, let's take a look at Reach's cut weapons now, and although, granted, there aren't that many, the few cut weapons that there are interesting to say the least. So, early on in Reach's development, Bungie actually planned on giving the rural civilians and militiamen of Reach their very own sandbox, and although these weapons sadly were never intended to be used by us, I still think they're really cool. There was a rifle, that same rifle with a scope, a shotgun, and then that very same shotgun with the barrel sawed down. Now, it goes without saying, but these weapons look really grounded. They look nothing like the UNSC weaponry that we're used to. They're not covered in little lights, little buttons, dials, thermal vision cameras, or anything like that. Just some very nice, down-to-earth, modern, rustic civilian-styled weaponry, which I do think fits the farmers and civilians of Reach. The rifle even looks like an ever so slightly more futuristic version of the VPO 101. These look like the exact kind of weapons that I would have expected to see in the rural areas of Reach. And you know, also, the contrast of fighting alongside the militia, who were at this time using rudimentary firearms like these, whilst you and June were rocking the firearms industry's latest and greatest, would have been a really cool contrast, I think. Of course, in the end, these were never realised, and the militia just ended up using UNSC tech, which, granted, did spawn this really cool quip from June.
You know, this stuff is stolen.
What, you gonna arrest me?
No, I'm gonna steal it back.
But I can't help but feel like they would have felt so much more like an authentic underground militia composed solely of civilians had they used the weapons that we're seeing here. Now, a very interesting cut weapon that I kind of briefly mentioned earlier that I had no idea about until I went down the rabbit hole for this video is the Forerunner Staff. So, for some reason, a wieldable Forerunner Staff was found in the files of Reach's DLC. Now, okay, complete schizo theory here, but I wonder if in some really early version of Reach's campaign that we've not seen yet, Bungie actually intended for us to venture deep into the Forerunner ship that Horsey was investigating, because outside of a few multiplayer maps that are entirely unrelated, that ship was the one single Forerunner thing in Reach, and so it seems obvious that this staff would have been found there. I mean, where the hell else would it have originated from? Man, can you imagine how awesome it would have been to find an almost Origins-esque altar with these staffs in at the core of that Forerunner ship? Oh, okay. I gotta stop dreaming up non-existent scenarios. I'm getting too excited. But I guess to caveat that schizo theory, the stuff was found in the DLC files of Reach, not the base game, so maybe it could have been a leftover from an early build that somehow snuck its way into the DLC files for some reason, or maybe it was something else entirely. Sadly, I feel like the truth of this thing might have vanished into darkness. Now, I'm just going to give this one a quick honorable mention because I know if I don't, I'm going to get 1,000 comments saying that I missed it out. The Reach LMG. So, despite only showing up in, I believe, one piece of concept art, this awesome-looking M249 SAW-inspired UNSC LMG has really become a fan-favourite weapon despite never existing. So much so that it's not only been recreated and added to Reach using God knows how many different mods, but it even inspired a weapon model in Halo Infinite. Personally, I think this thing looks way better than the SAW that we ended up getting, but sadly, Bungie never realised it. And the final notable cut weapon from Reach wasn't actually ever a weapon in Reach, nor was it cut, but just to hear me out on this one. So I found an old comment from Isaac Hannaford once again about some wishes that he had for Reach's sandbox that never came to be. Weapons that were designed specifically for Spartans. When we started on Reach, we had the opportunity to redesign or invent new weapons for the Spartan arsenal. I wanted to follow up on the Spartan laser that Tom Doyle and I proposed with a few other Spartan-class weapon systems. One hope was that a Spartan assault rifle would be equivalent to a 50 cal machine gun and that their DMR would be closer to a 30mm light cannon. I was never satisfied with how little we did to depict the weight and enormous physical strength of the Spartans in-game. Okay, so I gotta say, the idea of a hand-portable 50 cal machine gun instead of the standard 308 AR that Halo's had for literally ever would be awesome, as much as it might of course invalidate the 50 BMG chain gun. But holy hell dude, a DMR in the 30mm ballpark would be insanity. So for reference, the standard DMR in Halo just fires 308, it's 7.62 by 51mm NATO, standard stuff. And you're wondering what 30mm is, right? Well, the A10 Warthog's Avenger autocannons fire 30mm rounds. So imagine having a round of that size in your back pocket. Not gonna lie, I really hope we do see that one day, as ridiculously powerful as it might seem. I do think a heavier class of Spartan-only weaponry like this that can only be used by Spartans, that's way more powerful than regular weaponry, but not quite as strong as the turrets, would be a really cool addition to Halo's sandbox. But then again, I'm definitely biased by the idea of a 30mm DMR, because goddamn, the thought of using that is so cool. As for cut enemies, besides a litany of weird wildlife ranging from hawks to porcupines to squirrels and even the Halo Reach slug, yep, that's a thing that exists, the only cut enemy that we really know anything about is, brace yourself, Buta Jockey Jackal. Yeah, there's a Minecraft movie reference in there somewhere. Now, I say cut, it was really just a concept that never made it past 2 pieces of concept art, but the idea of jackals riding a Guta like a bantha and even wielding a whip in doing so is so on brand for them as a species. I love that they even gave them Covenant-themed armor as well. This is a side of the Covenant that we've never really seen before, but I think one day I'd really like to. You know what, Halo Studios? Give us the Jackal Jockeys. Halo 2 is a diamond of a video game, but you can't make diamonds without immense pressure. Halo 2's development is the most infamous example of crunch in the entire gaming industry. In the end, what the team at Bungie were able to pull off was nothing short of a cosmic miracle, a true testament to their skill and dedication. But the means in which that end was met were pretty horrendous. Aggressive deadlines, extreme overtime, developers living in their offices and having their families come visit them in the morning for breakfast, relationship breakups, divorces. Halo 2's development was excruciating for those involved. After E3 2003, Bungie returned to the office with the stark realization that what they'd just shown off and also spent 2 years building just didn't work and could never be released, which resulted in the Halo 2 that we got being made mostly in about a year and a half. with its developers having to go through the painful process of cutting extremely large amounts of content that they'd originally planned to be in the game. And that's where I come in. So today, we're going over pretty much everything that was cut from Halo 2's campaign, from levels and cutscenes, to weapons, vehicles, enemies, and even the entire Halo franchise's original ending that was meant to happen at the end of Halo 2. This one's going to be a doozy, my friends. Strap in. Okay, so let's begin by taking a look at the levels that were cut from Halo 2's campaign at various stages. And as you can probably tell by the length of this section of the video, there were quite a lot. Starting out, we have Covenant Ship. So originally, what is arguably the most famous Halo cutscene ever made,
Permission to leave the station.
For what purpose, Master Chief?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
was in fact a fully playable level where you took the ship out yourself. Now, it went through multiple iterations, but all of them seemed to begin the same way as the cutscene that we eventually got. In the first draft of the level, Chief lands on the ship, climbs to its trench, and inserts through a maintenance airlock, where he's then jumped by a ton of drones, and then the gameplay begins. In the second draft, however, the insertion cutscene is much more similar to the final cutscene that we got, except this time, like before, there's sadly no space pickle. Instead, Chief just lands above the ship's exhaust, climbs into one of its trenches, then slides down to its fusion reactor where the gameplay begins. And speaking of gameplay, the plans for this level revolved around inserting into the ship alongside a team of ODSTs and also Miranda keys for some strange reason. Apparently the level was meant to be the main introduction to Miranda's character, and the gameplay would have involved jumping between trains with ODSTs and also taking out the Covenant in the process. It ended with you taking out the ship's fusion reactor with a Wraith, a Ghost, a Banshee, or according to this whiteboard sketch, possibly also a Scarab, which sounds quite cool. And then the final cutscene played, in which Chief would blast through the hull of the ship in a Ghost and break into freefall through Earth's atmosphere, only to land in the troop bay of Jonathan's Pelican as the cruiser crashes down behind him. And I'm not gonna lie, this storyboard actually looks really similar to the cutscene where Chief jumps out of the spire into the Pelican in Halo Infinite. So I do wonder if inspiration was taken from these storyboards for that cutscene. If so, very cool. Next up, we have Alpha Moon, not to be mistaken for Moonbase that we covered in my last Halo 2 content video. Okay, here's a question. Have you ever thought that the aesthetic of burial mounds in Halo 2 feels kind of out of place? Well, there's a reason for that. It's because it was built from the leftovers of this cut level. Alpha Moon was set on Basis, which is the moon that orbited Alpha Halo's anchor planet, Threshold, thus making it the Alpha Moon. Ha 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 ha. It was part of the original Heretic story arc at the start of the campaign, and had you play as the Arbiter, alongside Artas and the Spec Ops Covenant, as you raided a Heretic camp on the moon. Now, sadly, very little is known about the level's gameplay. It was cut so early on in development that the Arbiter is still referred to as the Dervish. However, the dig site team are currently in the process of restoring it as best as possible, so at some point soon, hopefully we'll know a lot more about Alpha Moon. Remnants of the level did end up being used for both burial mounds and also in Quarantine Zone as well though, and according to Chris Butcher from Bungie, the level was drastically overambitious. We were building stuff that just couldn't be played in any engine. We built and detailed and went a huge way down the path with a whole bunch of environments and levels for the game that just totally didn't make it. If you look at the level with the flood inside the quarantine area, that is the remaining 20% of a gargantuan, sprawling level that was meticulously built and hand constructed, but that could never ever have shipped in any engine. But the level's ending has actually been revealed courtesy of Halo 2's storyboards, and it's a very interesting twist on the ending of the Oracle. So somehow, the Arbiter and the Heretic leader's final standoff takes place in Alpha Halo's control room. Very strange. After what looks like something of a bloody battle, the two form an alliance, and a proper one this time. Then, the Guilty Spark reveal happens, and as he's explaining the reality of the Covenant to the Arbiter, Tartarus comes in and shoots Caesar in the chest with a carbine, killing him, capturing Spark, and leaving. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I much prefer this version of the cutscene. In standard Halo 2, it always kind of irks me that the Arbiter is like genuinely listening to Spark's truth bombs, but Caesar opens fire anyway. Had he given Arbiter maybe just another minute or two to listen, he would have convinced him that the heretics weren't lying, but he thought that Arbiter was just simply too far gone, so he opened fire. But here, that doesn't happen. Caesar's death is also a lot sadder here as well, because obviously him and the Arbiter had clearly formed some kind of alliance, but it is what it is. Ooh, now next up we have one of my favourite Halo stories of all time that it will pain you to realise was once supposed to be a level. The Infinite Succor. Now this level was only ever briefly concepted, and very, very early on at that, but originally Eddie Smith and Rob McLeese toyed with the idea of a flood outbreak on a Covenant hydroponic ship where their livestock had been consumed and used to form a gravemind. Of course, eventually this idea became the basis of the last voyage of the Infinite Succor from the graphic novel, which is the story of how Artas became Halfjaw, in which he leads a team of Spec Ops Covenant, including his friend and also the greatest swordsman to ever live, Bero Kusavai, on a raid into the Covenant agricultural ship that went dark in the wake of the outbreak on Alpha Halo. When they arrive, they realise quite quickly that the entire ship has been infected by the Flood, and after attempts to save a rather spiteful and selfish minor prophet that was on board, it becomes very clear that the ship must be destroyed. With all his squad now infected, Artas engages in a final duel with Kusavai, who unfortunately is in the process of infection, where he puts his friend out of his misery at the cost of his mandibles and sets the ship on a collision course into the sun. That's of course a very brief summary of the story, but to cut it short, the last voyage of the Infinite Succor is amazing, not just from a narrative standpoint, but also aesthetically as well. And it's one that I seriously hope either the Halo 1 remake or the Halo 2 remake, if we ever get it, resurrects as kind of something of an origin story for everybody's favourite half-jawed Spec Ops commander. Artas deserves his origin story, and the Infinite Succor deserves to be a level. Ooh, 4 in a Tank. Now this one is iconic. So 4 in a Tank was a duo of levels that were meant to be set between Quarantine Zone and Gravemind that depicted both Chief and Arbiter's journey to the Gravemind's lair through the bowels of Delta Halo. But the storyboards for it open with an alternate version of the final Quarantine Zone cutscene. So here, Chief is present alongside Miranda and Johnson. Arbiter gets the drop on them, like usual, and 1v3s them, eventually forcing Chief into a fistfight with him before Tartarus' Phantom arrives and the brutes begin to circle all 4 of them, because this of course is where the Great Schism would have begun. Luckily for the allies though, a Flood Hulk arrives to crash the party. Now the Flood Hulk looks like a Sharkoi, but I think it was meant to be a very early version of the Flood Juggernaut. The brutes take the Hulk out, but the crushing weight of it coming down brings the platform down and causes it to collapse, sending Chief and Arbiter plummeting into the abyss. Arbiter vanishes into the darkness, but Chief lands about halfway down, grabs a brute shot, and it fades to gameplay, where he fights through the flood-ridden underbelly of Delta Halo. Now, by the looks of it, this was done both on foot and also in the eponymous 4 in a Tank, which was described by Jason Jones as something that was awesome, blows things up, glows a lot from little windows, and moves real fast. The idea was for Chief to be driving this tank through dark tunnels while the Gravemind's tentacles smash down beside you and race throughout the facility, moving behind doors like racing freight trains, before of course eventually reaching the Gravemind himself. Now of course this 4 in a Tank never made the cut into Halo 2, and sadly it's still not been resurrected to this day, although its geometry was kind of reused for the Quarantine Zone gondola, so I guess it kinda lives on. As for the Arbiter's level, which it seems would have been the second of the 2 levels, sadly we don't really know anything about it besides how it ends. So the Arbiter reaches the Gravemind's lair undetected and watches the Gravemind speaking to Chief, but he's eventually detected by a horde of Flood who enter the room and is captured. And then the Gravemind cutscene that we all know and love and dream about on a daily basis begins. Now, by the sounds of it, Bungie really loved this level and were really genuinely sad that it had to be cut. So sad, in fact, that somebody hid a poem written by Joe Staten that mourned its cancellation in the Halo 2 editing kit. And it went as follows. Oh tank, ill-defined, silent monkey on our backs. No whiteboard will e'er display your design. Were you raft, or Forerunner submarine, or monument to our sins? And the final fully cut level is Earth Arc, which in true Halo 2 fashion was in fact 3 levels designed as one. And in fact, it was the level embodiment of the original ending of not just Halo 2, but of Halo in its entirety. So Earth Arc was where Halo 2's cliffhanger ending was going to continue, and it was written at a time when not only was the Ark a location on Earth, but also at a time when humans and foreigners were synonymous. So, Halo's final act picks up as the key ship appears above Earth alongside the Covenant, and after speaking to Lord Hood and realizing where he is, Chief blows a hole in the hatch of the ship and begins his descent to Earth. On the surface, in Eastern Africa, Covenant carriers have gathered in low orbit above the Ark. Marines are engaged in ground warfare with the Covenant, and it's looking like a losing battle, until suddenly the ground behind them explodes in a plume of dust. They turn to react, terrified at what it might be, only for the Master Chief to emerge from the dust cloud, inspiring them to charge the Covenant artillery over the creek bed, where the gameplay begins and you presumably take out the artillery. The next cutscene opens with Chief and the Marines peering over a ledge right at the Ark, only to see an incomprehensible number of brute warriors, who spot them and immediately begin charging. With death all but certain, Chief readies his weapon and the Marines prepare for their last stand. And then suddenly, even more Covenant capital ships appear above them, only to begin glassing the brutes, turning the entire army to ash before the valiant humans. It turns out that these ships belong to the elites, who arrived at Earth at the last moment to support the humans and stop the Covenant once and for all. Pretty badass entry if you ask me. Suddenly, the Ark pillars begin to rise out of the ground, and 7 Phantoms, one containing the Arbiter and one piloted by Miranda and Johnson, come to ground and pick Chief up, and they descend into the trench surrounding the Ark where gameplay begins. Presumably, this gameplay section would have been pretty similar to the final section of the Covenant in Halo 3, because it ends with a cutscene where Chief, Arbiter, and Spark as well, approach Truth at the helm of the Ark. He and the Arbiter have their final conversation, and as Arbiter raises his plasma rifle at Truth, the cutscene fades to gameplay, where presumably you'd actually pull the trigger and kill the Prophet yourself, much like Bungie's original plan for Halo 3 as well, and it fades back to a cutscene where Truth is wounded on the floor, and the Arbiter finishes him off, not by stabbing him with a sword, but by snapping his neck with his hand. Chief deactivates the Halo rings, which simultaneously causes the Ark's pillars to turn into energy cannons that then fire flares up through the atmosphere, eventually creating portals that send them to the Halos. We then cut to Gamma Halo of all Halo rings, where the flare arrives and basically does exactly what it does to Delta Halo at the end of the actual Halo 2. Now, interestingly here as well, given that there were only 5 flares, that also makes it look like there were only 5 Halos, not 7 at this point in development. Well, maybe there were 6, given that Alpha Halo at this point was destroyed, 6 Halos and the Ark, which would add up to the Bungie 7, but the idea of there only being 5 Halo rings is, or 6 I guess, is quite weird. Anyway, back on the Ark, the facility starts to collapse, but Spark leads the two through a tunnel that leads even deeper into the facility, and once again it fades to gameplay, where you'd fight off brute honor guards as the construct collapses around you before escaping, with Chief running into a bright bloom of light as he escapes, which then transitions into a final medal ceremony complete with 0G fireworks. Bungie's words, not mine. Chief, Johnson, and Miranda, all out of armor, yes, Chief not in his armor, have a final scene together where they watch the victory parade. But the shot then cuts back to the Arbiter inside the Ark, where Spark leads him to a data vault, kilometers high and pulsating with holographic data. Suddenly, an explosion causes a large chunk of the facility to crash down on what they realize is a sarcophagus, located at the base of the vault. And when they go down to it, they realize what was buried within this foreigner sarcophagus. A human skeleton, delivering the hinted at but never before revealed shock twist that humans are in fact foreigner. Spark then flies Arbiter out of the Ark, kind of like how he does with Johnson at the end of Halo 2, and the elites have their own victory ceremony where he and Artas plot their course back to San Helios, and the credits roll. But that wasn't the end. Now, very interestingly, despite Bungie at the time of creating this storyboard being adamant that this was the absolute end to Halo's story, this version of the story still has the exact same post-credit scene as the Halo 2 that we got. That very scene where Cortana is trapped on the flood-infected High Charity with the Gravemind. Now, that would have been a painful note to end the series on and never resolve. The Flood are still out there, undefeated, and the series just ends there and that's it. I can kind of see why they didn't go with this in the end. Now though, regarding the huge final twist that the Arbiter discovers in the sarcophagus, it was very clear throughout the original trilogy that Bungie viewed the humans as foreigners. The two were meant to be one and the same. The main stories of Halo 1, 2, 3, and also certain books, in particular Joe Staten's Contact Harvest, quite literally objectively say that the two were the same. Although Halo 3's terminals do begin to muddy the water a little tiny bit, overall, with Bungie at least, it was very clear that they saw the two species as the same, and it wasn't until 343 took over that they were turned into entirely separate species. Now, I will caveat this by saying that I forget where, but somewhere in the Foreigner trilogy, it's either hinted at or outright stated that humans and foreigners do share a common ancestor, but somewhere down their evolutionary paths they split into two separate species. But even with that in mind, I gotta say, I vastly prefer Bungie's take on this whole thing, and that's coming from someone who is a self-confessed Foreigner trilogy fanboy who films every video with Silentium's cover art framed right behind him. I just think that all these kind of crazy, super futuristic and incomprehensible structures across space, in fact being built by our ancient ancestors who sacrificed themselves to stop the Flood from consuming everything, is just such a goddamn cool story twist. And when you split humans and foreigners apart, you lose the incredible moment of realization that that twist has. At some point, I do still plan on making that video breaking down the whole humans equal foreigners debate, where I'm going to go into much more detail about both sides of that argument, but god damn it, spoilers for that video, but I really gotta say, I vastly prefer the way that Bungie handled this. So that covers all of the cut levels. Now let's take a look at some very early versions of levels that we eventually did get, starting out with the incredibly iconic Earth City. Earth City was the first thing the world ever saw of Halo 2. It was a morphing of Outskirts and Metropolis set in a rather different version of New Mombasa that was known as the Arcology. Now, it had much more vehicle and urban combat than what we eventually got, and it really let you explore the kind of neo-futurist New Mombasa more than any level that we got in Halo 2, and thanks to the Dig Site team, you can actually play it after all these years. Link is in the description, as with any of the playable levels in this video. And secondly, we have the original High Charity, specifically the original ending of High Charity. Now, believe it or not, Chief didn't always Superman his way onto the key ship. Instead, there used to be a Warthog run which Vengeful Fadam restored in its entirety for his amazing Halo 2 Uncut mod. Link in the description as well. So, you drive through some sort of conduit construct thing, don't know what it is, but it looks really cool, and it's packed full of Covenant and Flood, before launching the Warthog into the key ship at the end. Okay, now let's talk about some cut enemies, starting out with an enemy that is quite possibly the most iconic enemy in all of Bungie lore, the Sharkoi. Originating from Marathon, where they were called the Hulks, they were originally meant to carry over from Marathon into Halo as the Driniol, or the Drinol in Halo CE, but they were cut. Then, when Halo 2 rolled around, Bungie tried to get them in again, changing their name now to the Sharkoi for some reason, but sadly, once again, they didn't make the cut. They were canonized in the Conversations from the Universe booklet that came with Halo 2's limited edition, where they had a very brief offhand mention, before then falling into canon obscurity again for some 13 years at least, until 2017, where Halo Envoy finally brought them back into the fold and for good. They aren't exactly in the forefront of the universe, but I really hope at some point, whether it's in the Halo 1 remake or in Halo 7 or whatever, they finally get officially added to a Halo campaign, because man, the Sharkoi have been waiting in the wings of the Halo universe for so long now, it's about damn time they show up in a game. Speaking of things from Marathon, next up we have the space jellyfish that were meant to exist as wildlife that were native to the gas giant of Threshold. Now, they were based on life forms apparently that might hypothetically exist in the atmosphere of gas giants like Jupiter, but sadly they were cut from the game because their designer, David Dunn, had the idea for them to make sounds that went a little bit like this. Bloop bloop, which was deemed preposterous. Now, I said earlier, speaking of things from Marathon, and there's a reason for that. So, in Marathon Infinity, a kind of similar looking creature floats about in the hub level's electric sheep that occur in the Marine's kind of weird state of dream nightmare limbo. It's a very loose Marathon connection, but you know what I'm like with Marathon and Halo. If there's a connection to be talked about, you damn straight I'm going to talk about it. Now, this one kind of blew my mind. I had no idea about it until I was researching for this video. So, in Halo 2 originally, the Jackals were going to be quite revolutionary. So, it's common knowledge at this point that in Halo 2 you were originally meant to be able to pick up the Jackal's shield and hold it like a riot shield kind of thing, but it seems like Bungie's ideas for the shield far transcended just being able to pick it up and dual-wield it. So, according to these really early sketches from John Butkus, the Jackal shield was originally able to fire a projectile, was able to collect energy from plasma weapons that were fired at it, and then send it all back in one blast, and even able to create a protective dome of energy that surrounds the Jackal. This is stuff that I'd like to see in a future game, not gonna lie. And very briefly, on the topic of Jackal shields, there was a carrier form variant in Halo 2's files that seemingly had a Jackal shield embedded within its biomass. Now, whether this was meant to be a Jackal turned carrier form, or is just a visual bug, or was a prototype for some sort of armored carrier form, we have no idea. All we know is that this right here is a thing that exists. But hands down, the most iconic cut enemy of all time is the Flood Juggernaut. So this thing was originally meant to appear in the Oracle, Sacred Icon, and Quarantine Zone, and they were simultaneously giant Flood Hulks, but also local leaders for the Flood. If they were taken out, all local combat forms would go dormant, but that was the thing, taking them out was going to be tough. So they had two massive tentacles that did immense damage to both players and vehicles, and could launch objects really far. They could jump extremely high in the air, they could climb walls, and they could even cover their faces, which is where their 6 infection forms resided, with their tentacles. When low on health, they'd also go berserk and slam their tentacles into the ground before roaring at you. Now, thankfully, the Juggernauts are fully established in the canon now. They exist, so fingers crossed. They're crossed so hard they're snapping right now that not if, when the Flood eventually do return, the Juggernaut comes with them, because man, it's about damn time. And finally, we have a cut enemy that actually indirectly made its way into Halo 2, but by accident. It's a weird story, we'll get to it in a second. This enemy is the Needler Sentinel. So on Quarantine Zone, for some peculiar reason, there's one Sentinel that fires Needler rounds, but as strange as it sounds, this Needler Sentinel isn't actually the cut Needler Sentinel. It's just a very, very coincidental glitch. So instead, the original Needler Sentinel was from a point of the game where there were several variants of the Sentinel Beam, all of which, again, Ventral Vidam restored in Halo 2 Uncut. So, of course, there was the Needle Sentinel Beam and its attached Sentinel that fired the red needles that the Enforcer fires. Then, there was the Sentinel Grenade Launcher, which fired the grenades that the Enforcer fires. And finally, the Sentinel Charge Bolt, which essentially acted like a railgun, all of which presumably had their own Sentinel variants attached as well. So, at some point in development, there was a Grenade Launcher Sentinel and even a Railgun Sentinel. And speaking of weapons, let's have a look now at a ton of weapons and vehicles that were sadly left on Halo 2's cutting room floor. A load of them, in fact, have only recently been discovered by the dig site team, and so there are tons of these that I had no idea existed until now. But first off, let's start out with a familiar weapon that has deserved a comeback for 23 years now. The Flamethrower. Now, interestingly, Halo 2's version is almost identical to the Halo 3 model, except of course it's held in first person over third, which I gotta say I much prefer. I do not like Halo 3's flamethrower at all. Halo 1's remains the king, but god damn we need a new one in Halo. It's been way too long. But interestingly, the UNSC flamethrower wasn't the only flamethrower cut from Halo 2. Yes, in my idea of a perfect dream, there was also a Covenant flamethrower called the Disintegrator, which was meant to be in Halo 2, which fired a red flame. Sadly though, it was cut really early on in development, alongside also a unique enemy that was going to wield it, the Disintegrator Hunter, which sounds really badass. Back to human gear, at one point a flashbang was meant to be in Halo 2, which obviously would blind and stun its enemies, but seemingly only in campaign, thank god. It was cut later in development, but at some point there was the idea to move the blind and stun effect over to the frag grenade to make it more effective beyond raw damage output, but clearly that was cut as well. Much like Halo 3's chain gun, originally you were meant to be able to detach the GPMG from its stand and carry it around with you in Halo 2 as well, except again this time in first person. And by the looks of it, this thing made it quite far through development because it seems mostly complete. It also sounds badass as hell and is really fun to use. And speaking of the turrets, there was also meant to be a grenade launcher turret as well, although whether or not it was meant to be detachable like the GPMG, I'm not quite sure. The suppressed SMG, which of course eventually made its debut in ODST, was originally meant to be in Halo 2 as well. Now, the Halo 2 version has been available to use ever since Halo 2 Vista launched in 2007, so this one should be nothing new. It sounds pretty cool, but I mean, it's literally just a standard M7 SMG with a suppressor threaded on the barrel. There are no changes to AI behavior when using it either, which is unfortunate, but given Halo 2's scrapped stealth mechanics, I'd hazard a guess that at some point in development, it was meant to let you take enemies out quietly. Gotta say it again, I really want that in a new Halo game. And finally for the UNSC gear, satchel charges were cut as well. Now, who knows what they would have functioned like, but maybe they would have let us open that door ourselves without Hunter assistance. Just an idea. Moving on over to the Covenant gear, we have the incredibly gnarly sounding Blamite Harpoon, which does exactly what it says on the tin, and it was supposed to be Bungie's second attempt at getting a harpoon-styled weapon in Halo after its predecessor was cut from Halo 1. Recently, the Plasma Mortar was discovered by the dig site team. Now, all we have for this thing right now is its model, which honestly looks really reminiscent of Halo 1's cut gravity wrench weapon. But I think it's safe to assume that it launched plasma mortars, maybe like the plasma launcher. It's kind of a good assumption given that, it's literally called the Plasma Mortar. On the topic of cut Halo 1 weapons, the gravity rifle was originally meant to be in Halo 2 as well, and this is a weapon that I have a very weird affinity for. It was restored in CE Plus a few years ago by a great team of modders, many of whom are now on the dig site team, and I love how this thing looks and sounds and behaves. I'd love to see it come back at some point looking exactly like this. And lastly for the Covenant, they were meant to have some kind of EMP mine, which, well, I'll let you guess what the EMP mine did. As for the Foreigners, as we touched on earlier, there were meant to be 3 additional variants of the Sentinel Beam that Verdam restored in Halo 2 Uncut. There was the Sentinel Needler that fired the Enforcer's red needles, the Sentinel Grenade Launcher that fired the Enforcer's grenades, and the Sentinel Charge Shot, which was something of a Sentinel railgun. Seriously, if you haven't done so already, go and download Halo 2 Uncut, you will not regret it. And finally, let's go over Halo 2's laundry list of cut vehicles, starting out with what is nowadays considered probably the most beloved Halo vehicle of all time that has its roots in Halo 2, the Falcon. Yep, you heard right, the Falcon was meant to be in Halo 2. So it was designed by Marcus Leto as sort of kind of mini Pelican, designed to ferry troops in and out of hot zones, armed with a nose-mounted chain gun and 2 passenger seats. It was originally meant to kind of play like a Black Hawk type vehicle, but sadly it was eventually cut. Marcus loved the idea though, so he continued to iterate on it between Halo 2 and Halo 3's development, which eventually led to the Hornet, although he said that he wasn't too satisfied with the Hornet, so he continued to iterate on it even more during Reach's development until we got the Falcon that is now quite possibly the most beloved Halo vehicle of all time. The Mongoose had its roots in Halo 2 as well. It looked and functioned almost the same as Halo 3's, except with no passenger seat and with an extra variant that added front-mounted guns much like the Gun Goose, although it was later scrapped because Bungie thought that it interfered too much with the Warthog and the Ghost in the sandbox. But then of course it was brought back in Halo 3 solely as a support vehicle, with its gun-toting brother being revived in Halo 2 Anniversary. Back into the air, we have the Strike Fighter, which may have been the earliest iteration of the Sabre, or rather the idea that created the Sabre. So it was designed to be a defensive space fighter that you'd see in the opening battle above Earth, and actually was never intended to be in the gameplay because, according to Marcus, they just couldn't find a way to fit it in. So it was demoted to a cutscene only vehicle before being cut entirely because there wasn't enough time to add it in. Now, for some reason, this thing has always reminded me of the Naboo Starfighter from Phantom Menace. Maybe it was because I saw this in the Halo 2 documentary around the same time that Phantom Menace came out, give or take a few years, not sure, but it looks kind of similar to me. Okay, these next two come as a pair. Halo 2 was actually meant to have two tank variants, the Sun Devil and the Tarantula, which I gotta say are two really cool names. They were both Scorpions modified with anti-air capabilities, with the Sun Devil replacing the main cannon with two pairs of twin-linked 40mm autocannons and a target acquisition radar assembly, whilst the Tarantula came with dual scimitar rocket pods. You'll be happy to hear though that both are entirely canon now, with the Sun Devil excelling against slower moving air targets like Banshees, whilst apparently the Tarantula proves mostly ineffective. Poor guy. Staying in the tune of variants, there were originally meant to be quite a few different kinds of Warthog in Halo 2 as well. There was the Tropic Hog, which came with a kind of jungle-styled camo finish, the Arctic Hog that came with an enclosed cabin and quad tracks, the Recovery Hog, which is just the Troop Hog that we got in Halo 3, and the Rocket Hog, which, I've gotta say, is the coolest looking rocket hog in all of Halo. There was also supposed to be a Desert Hog and a Night Mission camo Warthog as well, but no pictures or models of these exist. Moving over to the high seas, just like almost every Bungie Halo game, water vehicles were concepted and scrapped, with the Orca being their attempt at making it work in Halo 2. Sadly though, there are no pictures or models of the Orca, nor are there any for its variant, the Mortar Orca. So hopefully, this footage of the Dig Site team's splash site water racing level will be equal parts fitting and nostalgic. As for the Covenant vehicles, starting out we have a vehicle that took Bungie literally 3 attempts to finally get in a game, the Anti-Air Wraith. I mean, this thing is literally just an anti-aircraft Wraith, there's not really much else to say here. Going back to the variants, the Ghost was also meant to have a few as well. There was going to be an Excavation Ghost, which, no, I can hear you getting excited, is not a Ghost with dual front-mounted Scarab guns, I am afraid to say, but rather it was meant to be a uniquely styled Heretic Ghost, kind of like the Heretic Banshee. There was also going to be a VTOL Ghost, which I guess was intended to fly in some capacity, and also a Special Forces Ghost, which likely would have just been used by the Spec Ops team that wiped the Heretics out. Now, something I had no idea was meant to be in Halo 2 until researching for this video was the Chopper. Yep, the Chopper was meant to be in Halo 2, although in this game, at least in its development, it was referred to as the Brute Cycle, and sadly, it was only ever present in some of Eddie Smith's concept art, but I gotta say, it looks near identical to the Chopper that we ended up getting in Halo 3. And speaking of things that I had no idea existed, you guys remember the blood mounts that the Locust rode into battle in Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 3? Well, apparently the Brutes of Halo 2 were supposed to have their own versions of the Blood Mount, referred to as Brute Mounts. Now, God knows what creatures these were meant to be. I want to say a Sharkoi, but somehow I doubt it. Even still, you're going to need a big creature to support the weight of a Brute. That said though, I will say when the Sharkoi are eventually added to a game, I'd kind of love to see this Reach concept art of the Covenant riding a Guta finally turn into gameplay with the Sharkoi. They'd be kind of perfect for it. Okay, so if you saw my video recently about Halo 2's Milestone 1 levels, then these next two ships will be very familiar to you. This is the Command Shuttle, which is a much bigger, much more heavily armoured take on the Spirit, which in the level M1 exploration was parked up outside a foreigner structure and acted as the Covenant's local base of operations. Oh, and also this thing was meant to fly with its cockpit facing forward, unlike the Spirit, which had it facing backwards for some reason. Who can understand Covenant engineering, seriously? Now, call it a hunch, but I think the Lich that was introduced in Halo 4 was actually based on this thing, considering that it not only fills a very similar role in its use, but also looks an awful lot like this very early blockout of the Command Shuttle. And then there's the Lightbridge ship, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a ship that was used to create light bridges to bridge gaps over canyons and the like, so Covenant troops could pass over them unscathed. Very situational, but it's a cool concept nonetheless. And finally, we have some variants of what has been unanimously decided upon as the greatest Halo vehicle of all time, the Covenant Bus, or as it's known by the Covenant, the Shadow. Now, if you don't love the Shadow and think that this thing is hands down the best Halo vehicle of all time, well, I hate to break the news to you, but you're a fake Halo fan. Your Halo card has officially been revoked. I'm sorry, that's just the way that it goes. So for all of you real Halo fans who love and adore the Shadow more than anything in life, it's gonna pain you to learn that this thing was actually meant to have 2 extra variants. There was gonna be the Troop Shadow, which Verdam restored, and is literally just a shadow with a ton of seats in its center for infantry, and then the Excavator Shadow, which, again, like the Ghost, although it sounds like it was meant to have a Scarab's excavation beam as its turret, that wasn't the case. It was just meant to be a Heretic Shadow, basically, that had that really cool Heretic Banshee texture that was only ever seen on the Banshee, but I kind of wish more vehicles got it. Yeah, that's what this thing was meant to be, but god damn it, Shadow Bros, we lost. We lost. The Halo 3 that Bungie released in 2007 is radically different to their original vision for the game. Not only is it much smaller, but it lacks so much of the variety that they'd originally intended for the game to have. Now, don't get me wrong here, the Halo 3 that we got was still nothing short of superb. A campaign packed full of hyper-memorable moments, iconic lines, and beloved encounters. But today, we're going fully in-depth into Bungie's original Halo 3 campaign, every cut level and story beat, including Guardians, flood-infected Scarab battles, a level based on Blood Gulch, and so much more. Seriously, if you thought you knew Halo 3, well, I'm about to blow your mind. Okay, so to begin, I want to break down this image here that I'd never seen up until like a few weeks ago. So this is one of the earliest layouts that Bungie knocked up for Halo 3's campaign, and it shows their original plans for the Earth portion of the game, which, as you can see here, was originally much larger. So the idea was for the levels to kind of naturally progress through the environment of Kenya, beginning at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro and passing through ravines, rivers, forests, cliffsides, and towns, before ending on the edge of the Arc Portal at Voi, just like in the regular game. Now, one of my favourite things about Halo 2 and Halo 3 was having Halo's story take place in locations that actually exist now in the real world. It's something that I wish Halo would do more of nowadays, because it creates this kind of unique personal association with this crazy story that's set 500 years in the future, because it's taking place in areas that exist in our reality, and seeing how much more of this Bungie had planned just cements my love for this idea even more. But there's a lot more than just a map of the planned levels in this picture. Now, granted, this is quite a low resolution picture because it was likely knocked up sometime in 2005, but you can actually see the levels that are attached to each location and also some of their respective sections. So, let's go through them, starting from the top. The first level, Kilimanjaro Rainforest, actually does seem pretty similar to Sierra 117, both in its setting and also its proposed layout. Besides the inclusion of a warthog, the first section is just a linear path through a rainforest, the only difference being that it ends in what's called training grounds, which was likely some kind of scaled up tutorial-like section. But the second level, Ravine, is where things start to get quite different. As the name implies, it was meant to be a warthog run descending down an arid ravine at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro, which would then lead to level 3, Riverside, which takes place in a savannah besides, you guessed it, a river, and it had 2 sections, Bridge and Village. Now, by the looks of it, this village was meant to be an actual rural African village, which would have been such a cool environment to go through and fight Covenant in. Making it through this village would lead you to a plateau, which is where level 4, Plateau Forest, would take place. Seemingly another vehicle-based level, seeing as the only major encounter of this level is called Ghost Encounter, and something tells me that they're not referring to any kind of supernatural ghost. Level 5, Rebel Base, sounds quite interesting. It makes you wonder if at some point insurrectionists were actually planned to be in Halo 3. I mean, no lore has ever really cemented the Innies having much of a foothold on Earth, given, it's the UAG's home planet. Of course, they wouldn't let their #1 enemy have a foothold right outside their back door. But maybe originally that wasn't the case. Maybe originally some of the insurrectionists were actually going to have a foothold on Earth. Anyway, this level kinda seems like a Halo equivalent of that Resident Evil 4 house lockdown section. So you'd enter the base, and then the base defense encounter begins. Likely something kinda similar to Nightfall in Reach, where you team up with the insurrectionists to hold off the Covenant. But according to the map, it looks like you'd slowly get pushed back to the cliff edge and eventually get pushed over the cliff edge, and then level 6 would begin, Rift Valley. Now, this picture of Rift Valley looks awful familiar. It looks very reminiscent of the location that Chief walks through in Halo 3's announcement trailer, and also, by extension, the location of Halo 3's main menu background as well, and it was set to be the location of probably the biggest Earth level that Halo 3 was meant to get. The level, again, was another vehicle level, and it was meant to span this entire valley. The level looks huge. It'd start out with a Wraith encounter, then an encounter with the Mantis AA turrets that you take out on the Storm, followed by a convoy, which gives me Halo 2 Shadow vibes, and ending at what looks to be some kind of UNSC vehicle depot, before leading into yet another vehicle level, number 7, Sagala Hills, in which the second vehicle encounter, brace yourself, would have been an epic vehicle battle against the Scarab on Blood Gulch. I absolutely love this idea. Incorporating iconic multiplayer maps into campaign level design is actually something that I've wanted to see Halo try for quite a while. We always get MP maps made from campaign scenarios, so why not flip that coin and do it the other way? Why not have some campaign scenarios made from iconic, unique multiplayer maps? I've always had this vision in my head of going to a FUD research laboratory and just walking through Lockout, but in a campaign scenario. I think that could be really cool, and it's kind of cool to see that Bungie actually planned on doing that at one point. Anyway, after taking out the Blood Gulch Scarab, which is such a cool thing to say, we'd reach Crater Town, the 8th level, which not only had some proper concept art made for it, but also had its entire layout planned out. Its first encounter, fittingly named Hero's Welcome, would lead into the crashing of the Flood ship, which of course would then feed into level 9, which is aptly named Flood Ship. Now, I discussed Flood Ship in extensive detail in a video a few weeks ago, which will be linked in the description, but the long and short of this level is that you are supposed to descend into the crashed Flood ship, destroy its reactor cores, and basically crater the entire thing. And this would then lead into level 10, the final Earth level, Covenant Cruiser. And to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure what to make of this level, because at first, when I saw this, I figured it was just meant to be the cutscene that we ended up getting on the Shadow of Intent, but given that it's designated as its own entire level, it kinda looks to me like you are meant to board one of Truth's cruisers above the Arc Portal and use that newly commandeered cruiser to go through. As cool as that sounds, if we got that, I feel like we may have not got this iconic line, so I'm kinda happy we didn't.
And you, shipmaster, just glassed half a continent. Maybe the flood isn't all I should be worried about.
One single flood spore can destroy a species. Were it not for the Arbiter's Council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
So, the question that is undoubtedly on all of your minds right now is, what the hell happened to this version of Halo 3's campaign? Well, as with most ideas that are conceived very early in a game's development, it was cut up, trimmed down, and refined a significant amount, even by the time that Halo 3's alpha was privately released in late 2006. As of this alpha build, which is colloquially named Pimps at Sea, Flood Ship was the only level that was unique to this plan that remained. Everything else had been cut. And that kind of makes me sad, but you know what, if you subscribed right now, that'd cheer me back up. An Earth level that wasn't on that plan, however, was a level called Savo Township. Now, this level has only ever been mentioned in passing by ex-Bungie and the 343 artist Victor Leon, and I may be wrong here, but as far as my research goes, I couldn't find any reference to this level in the game files whatsoever, so whether this was another name for one of the early Void levels, like Savo Highway for example, or something else entirely, we'll likely never know unless one of the old Bungie guys wants to reveal it one day. Have a guess what you think this level might have been down below in the comments. And that brings us to the infamous Flood Voy and Flood Ship levels. Now, I covered these in extensive extreme detail in my last Halo 3 content video, link to that is in the description, but for the sake of completion, I'm going to go over them again very briefly here in this video. So, originally, Floodgate was actually split into two separate levels, Flood Voy and Flood Ship. Flood Voy was mostly similar to the Floodgate that we ended up getting, with a few extra encounters and scenarios added as well. So, for example, you'd hold off Flood in a marine camp, where one of the main objectives would be to evac as many uninfected marines as possible, and by extension, it seems as though evacing humans, and possibly civilians as well, was an overarching objective of this entire mission as you made your way to the crashed Flood ship, where the level would end and lead into Flood Ship. In the Flood Ship level, you'd descend into the crashed Hive ship and overload its reactor core. On the way, you'd find Cortana's message, which would hauntingly declare that the Flood have evolved, which would lead to a much more curated introduction to the pure forms than the one that we ended up getting. Once the reactor was overloaded, an on-foot trench run, which sounds very similar to the one at the end of Cortana, would take place, and would end with Chief reaching a breach in the ship's hull where a pelican full of elites, and also Johnson, would pick you up as the ship exploded, taking you to safety aboard the Shadow of Intent. In the end, the basis for these two levels would be condensed down into the Floodgate that we ended up getting, but a ton of geometry, encounters, and scenarios from Flood Ship were later reused in Cortana. Now it's time to talk about the tied coolest level that was cut from Halo 3's campaign, the infamous Guardian Forest. So if somehow you weren't already aware, there's a reason that Guardian in Halo 3 has such a unique aesthetic that's seen nowhere in the campaign, and well, that's because it's a remnant of a level called Guardian Forest that was meant to take place between the Ark and the Covenant. So at the end of the Ark, that area where the Chieftain challenged you to a 1v1 used to actually be a Forerunner gondola station. The idea was that the space battle between the elites and Truth's Armada, unlike in the regular game, would not be going well for the Allies, and so Artas would have had to bring his ships to ground, meaning that we'd have to find a different way to punch through the shield protecting Truth in the Citadel. So, Chief, Arbiter, and Guilty Spark would board one of the Ark's gondolas and travel through a region of the installation referred to by Spark as the Veneration Zone. And as a consequence, he informs Chief and Arbiter that he's not sure how the Guardians will respond. These Guardians are, of course, the now iconic Guardian Sentinels. So, as you entered this Veneration Zone, the forest, on the gondola, other gondolas would come down the opposite rail full of Covenant, much like the Regret gondola section in Halo 2. But when they'd stop, their geometry would change. It had come together in parallel and disconnect, creating and removing gameplay space in real time as combat was going on. Very cool. Eventually though, your gondola would suffer a power failure and make an unplanned stop in the foggy depths of the forest. And in your search for a way out, you'd crawl through the creepy forest and ascend the gigantic trees via Forerunner structures that are built into them. As you climbed up them, you'd begin to see signs of battle. A destroyed pelican hanging from the tree, parachutes hanging from the branches. You know, the more little tidbits that I piece together about this level, the more it starts to sound like a Halo level inspired by Vietnam. But when you reach the top of the trees, you'd come into contact with a Guardian Sentinel for the first time. So, according to Dan Miller, who was one of the lead designers on the level, the Guardian Sentinels were an enemy that were meant to fall somewhere between an elite and a hunter in terms of difficulty. The idea was for the Guardians to be introduced with their own vignette, so like a mini skippable cutscene that plays out in real time, and once the Guardian was defeated, you could rip out its eye and use it as a weapon, which is... man, that sounds so metal. Once the Guardian was dead, you'd be informed, likely by Spark, that this detour could actually be used to your advantage, because the Guardian Forest complex is home to the Ark's defences, which, given the fact that the Allies are suffering heavy losses in orbit to Truth's fleet, is a pretty big game changer. So, to reactivate the Ark's Sentinel defences and turn them on Truth, you'd hop in a Hornet or a Banshee and fly around this vast forest, activating 3 generators. Now, this is just my assumption, but given that you'd need enemies to fight during this section, I think it's safe to say that you'd be fighting more Guardian Sentinels in the air, as well as Sentinel Enforcers. Now, the Sentinel Enforcers, my beloved, my favourite kind of Sentinel, are mentioned in one of the early drafts of this level, but aren't specifically mentioned anywhere in the early Halo 3 script that I'm getting a lot of this information from. But, you know, given that the Enforcers are anti-vehicle Sentinels, I think it's fair to assume that they'd show up during a vehicle section in a Sentinel level. Once the final generator is activated, you'd suddenly find yourself sealed inside its chamber. It then turned out that the facilities that you were going to activate these generators in fact weren't facilities, but rather were the inside of a gigantic Strato Sentinel, which nowadays we know as a Retriever Sentinel. Now locked inside its core room, the Strato Sentinel would awake and begin rising from the forest floor, chunks of dirt and moss tumbling from its metal belly as it heads skyward. When you'd finally find your way out to the exterior of the Sentinel, you'd look out and realise that you were already far above the forest canopy. As you look out to the level skybox, you'd start to see a load more Strato Sentinels start rising above the canopy as well, and they'd all begin to attack Truth's fleet. The Covenant ships would open fire and a second space battle would ensue, but the Sentinels are nigh on invulnerable. The one that you're standing on would suddenly start heading for a cruiser directly above you, and so you'd have to make a quick escape. Luckily though, Johnson's in the area with a Pelican. He'd fly it beside the Sentinel, matching its speed and prompting you to manually jump off the Sentinel and into Johnson's Pelican, where the final cutscene would play and the level would end. In this cutscene, the sky above would be wrought with chaos. Chief would land with a heavy thud on top of the Pelican, flying once again pretty well for a brick, before giving the Arbiter, who was with him the entire time by the way, a hand into the troop bay. Then, as the Pelican pulls away, Chief, Arbiter and Johnson would watch as cruisers and other debris of battle fall from the sky, glowing like embers from a great fire. Artas and the Shadow of Intent would be saved, and the Ark's surface would be littered with the wreckage of countless Covenant carriers. With his fleet dealt with, the Allies now have a clear shot at the barrier that's protecting Truth in the Citadel, or at least what became the Citadel, so they begin heading toward it. But as they do, another Strato Sentinel rises out of the smoke and almost swallows the Pelican whole. The pilot hard banks, just avoiding it, and Johnson stares back as they fly towards the distant barrier, and the level ends. And that is the iconic Guardian Forest, a beloved level that was, as we know, eventually scrapped, but elements of it did live on. So Dan Miller, who was one of its designers, was also one of the lead designers on Reach's New Alexandria, for which he reused a load of Guardian Forest's air vehicle segment. So, both Guardian Forest and New Alexandria have you flying through a densely populated environment and landing at 3 different POIs to carry out an objective. Yep, New Alexandria is basically just Guardian Forest reincarnated. You'll never look at that level the same way again. Within Halo 3, the air vehicle segment was turned into the Hornet section that we got on the Covenant, and also the model for the Guardian Sentinel was, of course, reused on Epitaph as a hologram, purely because the multiplayer team just loved how it looked. But now we know that that hologram is, of course, Offensive Bias, who takes the form of a Guardian Sentinel. This level is absolutely legendary, and honestly, if we ever end up getting Halo 3 Anniversary or a Halo 3 Remake, I would do 1,000,000,001 things to have it be built to Bungie specifications and added to the game. However, Guardian Forest wasn't the only cut level set between the Ark and the Covenant. So, in a similar way to how Floodgate was once 2 entirely separate levels, the same was also the case for the Covenant. It was split into Alpine and Foreigner City. So, let's cover Alpine first. Alpine was essentially the first half of the Covenant as its own dedicated level. The Pelican from Guardian Forest, containing Chief, Johnson, Arbiter and a bunch of Marines, approach the barrier while Johnson, chewing a cigar, gives a pre-battle speech. Eventually, once the second tower was deactivated, you'd get your first Cortana moment since going to the Ark. A garbled message, mixed strangely with audio that sounds like it could be coming from the elites, largely unintelligible and conveying feelings of desperation and horror. And this moment is quickly followed by the arrival of High Charity. Chief and Arbiter watch pieces of the city's debris come crashing down to the surface, crushing warthogs and slamming into mountainsides, causing a gigantic avalanche. Chief braces one of the Marines to protect him, and all is lost in a flash of white. We then fade back in, and what was once a green Alpine-like level has been consumed by snow. Chief looks up to the portal and sees other chunks of matter floating through the sky like embers, only to be transformed into darting meteors as they hit atmosphere, and are followed by an ungodly roar from the portal. The Gravemind has arrived. We then feel as High Charity crashes into the Ark beyond the barrier, creating a collision that shakes the entire installation. And then the gameplay picks up again, but now the Flood are also present. Up above, some heavily damaged elite ships arrive, limping across the sky, and Miranda tells Chief that the Flood have crippled the Arbiter's fleet, but also that they bypassed Earth and headed straight for the portal to come to the Ark. At some point, you'd pass through a Guardian summoning temple, which sounds cool as hell, before deactivating the final barrier switch and going up what's called a mega escalator to the next level, Foreigner City. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this may be my tied favourite cut Halo 3 level, and maybe even tied favourite cut Halo level altogether. Foreigner City was the level equivalent of the Citadel section of the Covenant, and my god, does it look cool. So the reason that this level was cut / heavily repurposed and morphed into the final section of the Covenant was because Bungie thought the concept just kinda gave too much away about the Foreigners and their mystery. Fair enough. The original idea for the city was that its design was meant to showcase values held by Foreigner society and how they may have lived their daily lives. It was more than just cool shapes with mysterious purpose. Its design was meant to tell a story. One potential idea was that the city was meant to be a housing installation for Foreigner scientists, possibly even those led by the Librarian. Now, quite a few pictures of this city level exist, and they look majestic. As you can see, it was ginormous, supposedly so big that you could fit an entire game within it. So yeah, pretty damn big. These pictures though, oh my god, these ones in particular, these are from the Halo 2.5 engine, so the version of Halo 3's engine that was on the original Xbox, and this version of the city just looks gorgeous. I love how desolate and abandoned it looks, whilst also simultaneously being consumed by nature. It's a massive shame that we didn't get this. I understand why Bungie didn't add it, and I actually kind of agree with their motives for not adding it, but man, looking at this design, it's so cool. Its design was kind of repurposed for the cartographer building on the Ark, and also reused entirely in Origins Part 1 in Halo Legends, which I use in every Flood video, so you guys are probably very familiar with that, but man, I would just love to see a reality in which we could actually explore this city in person in a game. Now, as for the level itself, well, it was pretty unique. So, the level opens at the city gates with the goal of finding the Ark's control citadel, which is located somewhere within. Throughout the push through the city, the Flood would seemingly prioritise the Covenant over your own forces, and then, over the comms, you'd hear Miranda and her team come under heavy fire before being captured. As you push through the Grand Promenade and the quarters to the Citadel, Flood spores and tentacles would consume the city's very structure. Huge four-way battles between the Allies, the Covenant, the Flood, and the Sentinels would take place. You'd fight a Flood-infected Scarab alongside Guardian Sentinels, and you'd even use that Scarab's main cannon to blast open a gate before fighting off 2 more Scarabs in your own Scarab right outside the Citadel. Bungie even described this section as most massive Scarab battle of all time, and you can probably tell from how high-pitched my voice just got how cool that sounds. I think you can also see quite clearly here how the final version of the Covenant that we ended up getting came to be. Once inside the Citadel, Truth would be using Miranda to activate the Halos. After a struggle, she'd be able to get her Magnum out of a holster, but she can't use it in time because Truth comes up behind her and strangles her, forcing her to activate the Halos before snapping her neck with his bare hands. It's pretty brutal. I mean, her death in the regular Halo 3 was quite brutal, but having Truth's hands just snap her neck, god damn, that's pretty dark. Like usual, the Flood ally with Chief and the Arbiter to allow them to stop the Halos, and they reach Truth just in time. The rings are deactivated, but instead of the Arbiter assassinating Truth, Truth instead becomes fully infected, and the cutscene feeds into gameplay right as Chief aims his rifle at Truth, giving us the option of assassinating him. Very cool, but I'm gonna be honest, Arbiter's iconic assassination of Truth was absolutely the best outcome. When the Flood betray us again, it's a lot more bloody and horror-focused this time. So because the Halos have been deactivated, the entire nature of the Citadel and its structure changes, seemingly becoming a lot darker, with Flood advancing furiously from the shadows, forcing you and the Arbiter down into the bowels of the Citadel. Fighting off the Parasite through dark tunnels, you occasionally see a flash of blue, Cortana, and after successfully holding off a last stand against the Flood in a trapped space, the final cutscene would play, where Spark reveals Installation 08 and plans are enacted to use it against the Flood on the Ark. I gotta say, I love this line in Halo 3's script that opens the final cutscene. The last shell casing clatters to the ground. The Chief and Arbiter are surrounded by corpses of countless Flood. Rivulets of blood and viscera are splayed across the floor. That's pretty hardcore, right? And that is 4 in a city. I absolutely love the idea of extreme urban combat in a 4 in a city of all places. This kind of gameplay was reused by Dan Miller, who also worked on the level Kizingo Boulevard in ODST. I should have said earlier as well, part of this level was meant to include tank battles in the urban foreigner environment, and of course that's exactly what Kizingo Boulevard was, so clearly he reused a lot of his ideas there, just like he did with Guardian Forest on New Alexandria. I gotta say though, if/when Halo 3 Anniversary ever happens, they need to resurrect this level somehow. I swear to God, I would go crazy if they did. And finally, we have High Charity, a level that I already summed up in extensive detail again in my last cut content video, but I'm going to cover it briefly here, just, completion. So High Charity was what Cortana was originally meant to be. You might notice that although you go back to High Charity in Cortana, the location and the setting of that level doesn't really look like High Charity at all, and that's because it was actually made from the remnants of the Flood ship level. It actually shares more resemblance with a Covenant ship than High Charity. This level though, High Charity, did feel like High Charity. In fact, it was designed specifically to have you retread your steps from Halo 2 to go back and retrieve Cortana, going through some very familiar locations, but also with some pretty major additions in the form of 2 boss battles. The first boss fight was against an army of Flood-infected Arbiters in the Mausoleum of the Arbiter. Every single Arbiter that the Covenant had ever appointed would resurrect as a unique combat form, and you'd have to kill them all in one go. Pretty cool. And then, once Cortana was rescued, there'd be a gigantic boss-style encounter where you'd ride a Cortana-controlled Scarab, fighting off hordes of Flood and the Gravemind as she got it close enough to the Gravemind, where you'd then detonate the Scarab's reactor core, escape, and watch as it exploded and caused the Mausoleum of the Arbiter to fall and crush the Gravemind. We need that in a game one day. I swear to God, we need that in a game one day. Ever since launch, it's been rather clear that there were things missing from Halo Infinite's campaign. It was very obvious that a lot was cut, but we didn't quite know how much was cut, until now. So the information that we're going to be covering today comes courtesy of various different reputable sources: Jason Schreier, Jez Corden, Rebs Gaming, and also multiple public posts by verified X343 developers who worked on Halo Infinite. Now, I do want to give a particularly special shout out to Rebs Gaming for letting me collate a load of the information that he's gathered from all of his own sources and put into his own videos, so make sure you check out his channel, the link is in the description. So today, we're not only going to be covering what was cut from Halo Infinite's campaign, but also the litany of reasons why it was cut. So, broadly speaking, Halo Infinite started out as something of a Breath of the Wild-inspired open-world experience. However, by summer of 2019, which was only just over a year out from the game's original release, development was in what an ex-developer called Crisis Mode, and so 2/3 of the campaign were cut. More specifically though, one huge loose end that the game never once addresses is what happened to the UNSC Infinity, and although we still somehow don't know what happened to it canonically, we now know 343's original plans for it in Halo Infinite. So, shock horror, the UNSC Infinity wasn't actually meant to disappear into the ether. It was instead meant to crash land on Zeta Halo and serve as a hub location for you to return to. An FOB of sorts. As your central hub, you'd return to it for various reasons between missions, one of which was to interact with the Infinity's Marines and scientists who would give you quests to complete in the open world. And I can't help but think that this would have reused some of the same design and code from those Halo 5 weapons down missions, except, well, with actual intent and purpose behind your interactions. This Infinity Hub also reused assets from a cancelled Halo 5 project called Halo Infinity, which was a very early iteration of Halo 5's multiplayer that was radically different to what we got. Halo 5 Infinity was a version of the game's multiplayer that had a Destiny-style social hub set within the UNSC Infinity, where you could explore the various levels of the ship, very akin to Destiny's Tower. This was eventually scrapped, however, due to resource and time constraints, but we did see some remnants of it both in Halo 5's beta menu and also at E3 2015's Warzone preview experience. But that's a pretty big tangent. Eventually, Halo Infinite's Infinity Hub was cut and then redesigned into a single UNSC compound, which we actually saw in various bits of concept art. But then, sadly, that was cut as well, and in its place we got the rather bare bones and frankly boring FOBs that we see in the main game. I'm not gonna lie, this really does suck because the Infinity Hub and even the central kind of UNSC compound buildings sound like they had life and character to them, whereas I gotta say, the FOBs really didn't, to be honest. Anyway, moving on, let's talk now about what was hands down the #1 most anticipated part of Halo Infinite's post-launch life, and that was also one of my personal greatest sources of excitement for Halo literally ever: campaign DLC. Now, to temper expectations real quick, nothing has been leaked, at least yet, about 343's story plans with the DLC. However, Kevin Schmidt, who was an ex-343 senior lead designer on Infinite's campaign, said that 343 built systems within Halo Infinite for PvE Spartan Ops-like content to integrate into the campaign post-launch as a part of the game's overall live service. He said that tons of work was done to create and implement live service features and systems suitable for campaign in anticipation of DLC. Now, on the topic of campaign DLC, obviously it's not happening now, but whilst we're talking about it, there are some people that still like to deny the fact that it was ever even planned. Of course, 343 never officially confirmed it or said that it was ever coming, but there's quite a bit of near enough indisputable evidence, I would say, besides Kevin's words there, that confirm it was planned at one point. So first off, there was the Halo the Endless trademark that Microsoft filed right after launch. Then, if you go on the Wayback Machine and go to Halo Waypoint very shortly after Infinite's launch, on the Infinite section of the page, there's a section that literally says campaigns plural. And then also, if you go into Infinite's game files, the launch campaign is referred to as Campaign S1, so Campaign Season 1. So it's pretty clear here that there were plans to have more campaigns down the line. One quick note though, ignore the DLC moniker at the side of the text here. The only reason that's there is because Infinite is free to play and obviously the campaign is pay to play. So the campaign has to be kind of classified as DLC because of that. That doesn't actually mean anything, just don't look at that. Now, going back to what Kevin said, integrating a Spartan Ops style mode or kind of extra campaign into the regular campaign as a part of the live service was literally something that I asked for and honestly at one point practically begged for before the game even released. It really felt like a no-brainer. Just imagine, right? You finish the campaign as Master Chief, and then the post-campaign content, of course, in between the major story DLCs that we were supposed to be getting that continued the main story, was you playing as your own Spartan 4, who canonically was one of the survivors of the Infinity Crash, going around the open world and carrying out smaller objectives. Again, like Kevin said, very Spartan Ops-esque. You know, I've said this a lot over the years, but Spartan Ops in Halo 4 was a case of a great idea just being executed terribly. The levels were so boring and repetitive, but the idea of going on missions on Requiem as your canonical Spartan 4 after the campaign was amazing, and it would have arguably worked even better in Zeta Halo's open world. I gotta say, it's really cool to know that this was at least one of 343's plans with post-launch campaign content at some point. It's just really sad that it never came to be. Okay, speaking of the Zeta Halo open world, one of the main components of this open world in the base campaign were the Banished Outposts. Now, as fun as these encounters were for the first or second time, they were a far cry away from what 343 originally intended for them to be. This info again comes from Kevin Schmidt, who very recently shared a picture of an original version of Infinite's Banished Outposts, specifically of their layout, their gameplay loop, and the systems that surrounded them. Instead of one singular base that you assaulted, these areas were instead comprised of various specialized sub-bases, and then at the center, a heavily fortified stronghold. And according to some of Reb's sources who worked in the campaign, this reveal also gives us a deeper insight into a major part of the campaign that was cut: factions. So, instead of the single isolated structures of the outpost that we ended up getting, the strongholds were a much more realistic network of various mini-structures that surrounded the central core stronghold building. These sub-bases were barracks, weapon depots, and vehicle bases. The idea was that assaulting the stronghold would be incredibly difficult if you didn't first take out the surrounding outposts and facilities. If you for some reason chose not to, then loud sirens would blare that would summon tons of extremely strong troops to support the stronghold as you tried to assault it, making it near impossible to take over. Coming back to the factions, the entire world map was supposed to be split into several regions, with each region being controlled by a different sub-faction of the Banished, with the warlords in command of these factions using the strongholds in the areas as their main base of operations. Now, I'd assume that the intent with this was for each island to be controlled by a certain faction, because when you look at the map, it's almost very neatly segmented up, but that's just me trying to infer something. The warlords that led these factions would be named bosses that acted as the apex enemy of each stronghold, and each one of them had their own logo that was painted on their vehicles and various other places, very akin to how the White Hand of Saruman was brandished on Lurtz's face, and also the equipment of all the other Uruk-hai in Lord of the Rings, which, given the heavy Uruk-hai inspiration for the Banished in Halo Wars 2, is extremely fitting and something that I'm very sad we never got as a lifelong ultra mega Lord of the Rings fan. These warlords could also buff troops around them, which only further added to the difficulty of assaulting the strongholds alone. But they weren't the only unique enemies. Stationed at the nearby barracks outpost would be the warlord's personal guards, their Praetorian guards as Kevin Schmidt called them, who had increased stats and were also a lot harder to kill than a regular enemy. Then, the weapon depots were populated by normal enemies that wielded unique legendary weapons, akin to Halo 5's legendary variants, and the vehicle base was home to legendary vehicle variants, again, very much like Halo 5's, of which only one eventually made it into Halo Infinite, the Catalyst Chopper. Now, the idea was that if you didn't take out all of these individual support bases before attacking the central stronghold, all of these unique enemies, weapons, and vehicles would be sent to kill you, making it near impossible to take the stronghold without first clearing them. Just imagine, for a second, trying to clear a stronghold whilst there's 15 brutes firing arcane sentinel beams at you. Yeah, I can start to see now why this was meant to be impossible. Something else that these support bases had were modular upgrades that you could then take back to the hub and apply to various elements of the sandbox to upgrade them. I'm talking weapon attachments and also, by the sounds of it, vehicle attachments as well, given what the support bases actually were. Now, something that I started to wonder when I was writing this video is if some of the weapon and vehicle mods that you could scavenge in the campaign, when they got cut, later got repurposed into the various weapon and vehicle model microtransactions in multiplayer, seeing as for quite a while, all of these models that were releasing were literally just attachments as opposed to entirely new models. Like, for example, there was one that was a different shroud for the pistol, or a different muzzle brake for the BR, or different tires for the Warthog. They aren't entirely new models, they're almost objectively speaking attachments. Just some food for thought though. Either way, the idea of in-depth weapon customization is something that I would love to see in a Halo spin-off. I'm a huge firearms nerd, and I'd love to have like Tarkov level weapon customization for like a BR-55 or an M90 shotgun or a sniper rifle. That's like dream come true material. Don't get me wrong, I don't want Halo to suddenly go back to trying to clone COD in every way and add some kind of gunsmith nonsense to regular multiplayer, but for a spin-off game? Absolutely, this kind of stuff would be incredible. Just imagine like Tarkov level weapon customization for Halo weapons in a gritty ODST shooter. Okay, I'm going to stop dreaming because I'm going to start hyping myself up for something that will likely never happen. Anyway, moving on, in the space between the sub-bases, you'd run into brute patrols and prisoner convoys that were going between each facility, and then eventually when you took over the stronghold and killed all the enemies within, the UNSC would move in and take command of them, which I think, from memory, is what happens with the outpost that we got in Halo Infinite. I'm pretty sure that Marines come in and like overtake them once you've cleared the Banished out, but the way it's integrated in the campaign is nowhere near close to the extent that it was meant to be integrated. Okay, real quick, time out, your boy's got a theory.
Okay, time out, stop the bike, time out, come on, stop the bike.
Obviously, some watered down facets of this system did make their way into Halo Infinite, specifically the outposts, but I also think that despite factions being cut, the warlords were repurposed into the rather anemic Hand of Atriox that we ended up getting. So the Hand of Atriox was really hyped up like kind of a weird amount in 2020, I remember, as being quite a big part of the campaign, both in terms of the gameplay and also the narrative, when in reality, it really didn't end up being as significant as it seemed it was going to be. And I think a great example of that is Hyperius and Tavares. So those two bosses in particular really feel like leftovers of this old warlord and faction system, given that they have no intro to their boss fight, they have a very loosely designed arena, no presence or even offhand mention in any prior cutscene, almost zero build up to them even existing, and also the fact that you fight one of them in literally the only vehicle variant in the entire game. And you know, now that I think about it, Tremonius and I guess Chaklock as well kind of feel like leftovers of this system as well, but more well-built and robust leftovers. The areas that you fight them in kind of feel like what I imagine the central strongholds would have felt like. They aren't just these massive open areas like Hyperius and Tavares' arena. Instead, they're like actual POIs of different regions of the map, presumably the regions that the factions they were once warlords of controlled. Theories aside though, themed boss fights like these taking place at each outpost would have given them so much more identity than I think they really ended up having, and to be honest, they kind of feel like the missing piece of their puzzle. It'd make so much more sense for these significant and named locations on the map to be controlled by equally significant named bosses as opposed to, I don't know, just like another chieftain or an elite general with an energy sword, you know? Like, it just makes them feel more significant. Anyways, back to the actual cut content. Dungeons were originally planned to be in the campaign, supposedly based on Mass Effect Andromeda's dungeons. Now, not gonna lie, I'm not a Mass Effect guy. I've played about 5 hours of Mass Effect in total, and I could never get into it as much as I really want to, so I don't know what the dungeons were like in Andromeda, but I mean, a dungeon is a dungeon, right? I've been in dungeons in Elden Ring, in Skyrim, in Oblivion, etc, etc. I imagine they're all kind of the same, right? I'd also assume that some of the cave systems we got in the campaign, especially that one with like a real foreigner door in it, was probably a leftover of the dungeon system. And speaking of the caves, there was a gigantic creature called the Crusher that was cut, that had literally an entire cave designed solely for an encounter with one. Now, these things are really interesting actually, because believe it or not, they're in fact the first enemy that we ever saw for Halo Infinite. Remember that thing that walks past the tent in the original E3 2018 trailer and knocks the radio over? Well, yep, that's a Crusher. Now, I'm not gonna lie, if these bad boys ever come back, I kind of hope they redesign them into a Sharkoi, to be quite honest with you. I think these designs are cool, but they kind of fill the exact same role that a Sharkoi would fill for the most part, and it's just far past time that we get these iconic bad boys in a game, and this role would be perfect for them. I am literally praying that the next game has Sharkoi in finally. Anyway, to the surprise of literally nobody, different biomes were also meant to happen, supposedly meant to be integrated into the open world, similar to the biomes in Breath of the Wild, which again, I know I'm committing sacrilege here, but I've never played it. Never played a single Zelda game in my entire life, so how they were integrated into Breath of the Wild, well, you're gonna have to fill me in the comments down below. Okay, this last piece of cut content pertains to something that has absolutely fascinated me since literally the game's launch, since I first opened the map in Halo Infinite. It's something that activated the 2009 Type 99 on Doris part of my brain for, well, literally the first time since 2009. This whole island in the northeast part of the map that was modelled but never used for anything. Now, for the longest time, we always assumed that this island was going to be used for DLC, which, I'll be honest, likely was the case at some point, but obviously that never came to fruition. However, using a now patched glitch, people were able to actually get to this island and explore it, and what's on it is really interesting. So there are entirely modelled lakes, a banished outpost, a cave, a sniper rifle, and a Halo 1 health pack. And this is where it gets interesting. So, according to one of Reb's XP43 sources, this island was originally meant to be a gameplay space, but sadly it was cut when between half and 2/3 of the game was scrapped. Now, that health pack specifically is a more recent find, and you can clearly see in this picture that it has that blue outline around it that implies that it was part of the sandbox and was able to be picked up and interacted with. And what would you guess? That was the original plan. So that same source also told Rebs that as a part of the push to have Infinite act as a spiritual reboot of the series that took heavy inspiration from Combat Evolved, health packs and the health system were going to return. There was a heavy push apparently for Combat Evolved inspiration to specifically influence the gameplay and the exploration, which of course are two things that the health packs would influence, but sadly they were cut by former Sandbox team leaders without ever providing a reason. They even go on to say that the Sandbox team had a lot of decision-making power for Infinite's development, and were apparently responsible for a significant amount of cut content. The health pack model itself did later get reused as a gun charm and also a utility, but something tells me we might end up seeing this model again in a certain remake. So, you're probably all thinking, wow, that sounds really cool. What happened to it? Why was it cut? And well, there are quite a few reasons, all of which, once again, I've sourced from Jason Schreier, Jez Corden, Rebs Gaming's videos, and also multiple public X343 developer posts. So then, according to one of Rebs' X343 sources, the campaign team were placed in a bubble and were restricted from studio collaboration. Now, all you gotta do is go back and watch any of the old Bungie or hell, even 343 Vidocs, and you'll realize how important collaboration between teams is in game development. And for some peculiar reason, upper management just didn't see that. Apparently, they thought that raw manpower, just throwing more devs at a problem, was more effective than collaboration, which I think it's fair to say isn't the case. This extreme compartmentalization is even worse when you consider that the campaign team were creating the first ever open world Halo campaign. They were designing something that Halo has literally never done before. So the collaboration that they were weirdly denied would have been even more valuable than ever before. Now, by the sounds of what some of Rebs' other sources said, this bubble went beyond just the campaign team. In fact, leadership split the entire studio into a number of different and highly segmented teams. But even worse was the fact that these teams were constantly vying for resources. Jason Schreier's source even said that it was like the studio was split into fiefdoms, and that this compartmentalization was so extreme that it felt like 4 to 5 different games were being developed simultaneously. This was so damaging, in fact, that it caused Infinite's creative direction to be up in the air until unusually late in the game's development. This development in a bubble with no collaboration apparently drained and stressed the campaign team, and so, as a remedy, the leadership started doing these things called hackathons, which were these week-long events where developers could take a break from working on Infinite to develop prototypes of their dream Halo games. Now, hackathons are pretty popular in tech. In fact, some pretty major things have actually been born from hackathons. I mean, Twitter, for example, was born from a hackathon, so they're quite a big deal. The idea with them isn't to specifically create an actual product, but rather just to prototype ideas and kind of have them on the back burner for later development, and in this case to also try and help raise morale as well. And fun fact, this is actually where the prototype for that saber-based space combat game Halo Starfighter came from. Starfighter was Kevin Schmidt's hackathon project. Reb sources said that these hackathons actually did go a long way in helping to improve team morale. It kind of just let them stretch their creative legs a bit on something that was different, yet still Halo. However, only 2 of them ever actually happened before they were shut down and all the prototypes made from them discarded because ultimately they didn't move Infinite's campaign any closer to completion. And the ironic thing is that the developers that spoke to Rebs told him that this actually had the opposite to the intended effect. The hackathons were having their intended effect. People were feeling more creative, more productive, and morale was higher. They were a very nice creative break from the work that was creatively draining them, but when they were stopped, the devs were sent back to square one. Okay, moving on to the testing that the campaign received, or rather the lack thereof, one of Rebs' sources said that the campaign received 0 external focus testing, unlike literally every prior Halo campaign, with I think the only exception to that being Combat Evolved. I spoke to a Bungie developer quite a long time ago now, and I'm pretty sure they said that Halo 1 didn't have any focus group testing, they only start with Halo 2, but that's by the by. However, when Joe Staten joined, he started to run external focus group testing for the campaign, but apparently by that point it was just too little too late. Rather, instead of doing external testing, the studio did something called Days of Play, which were days that they set aside for the entire studio to play the campaign. However, again, for some weird reason, leadership eventually stopped these days as well, alongside a load of other meetings and reviews for the campaign too, which inadvertently cut off all feedback loops for the campaign team as, like I said before, they were locked in a bubble. Reb said that nobody knew why leadership stopped these days. I assume it was to get everyone back to work on Infinite and make sure that it reached completion in time, but apparently the leadership didn't even bother taking part in the days of play when they were running, which isn't exactly the best look. The only time the leadership asked for studio-wide campaign feedback after days of play were cancelled was months before the game was shipped, which by that point, I mean, there was no time left to act on any of the feedback they were given. Again, it was too little too late. All in all, this is a pretty commonly known thing now, but it's the unanimously agreed upon opinion of a litany of ex-developers that the old, terrible leadership was the reason that Infinite released in the state that it did. A few years ago, post-Infinite, Jez Corden said that apparently Chris Lee, who was the studio head for most of Infinite's development up until like mid-2020 when Joe took over, wasn't exactly forthcoming to various members of leadership about both the state of Halo Infinite and also what was actually possible with the game. And the example that Jez gives is the whole split-screen fiasco where Bonnie literally said on stage that every Halo moving forward would launch with it, and then literally the next Halo game rolls around and split screen isn't there for the campaign, and eventually it gets canned entirely. Moving on, Microsoft were apparently overly focused on the Xbox Series X launch and tunnel visioned on it so hard that they insisted that Halo needed to be ready to launch with it, even though it was very clearly not ready to launch. However, when Joe Staten joined, he apparently went to Microsoft with a list of features that Infinite needed to have on launch to be a success, and said that those features, and by extension that success, could only be achieved with more development time, which eventually caused them to grant them the extra year of development. Yet another reason to love Joe Staten, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, I mean, this is stuff that we've known for a long time now, but several ex-developers have publicly stated their disdain for Microsoft's 18-month contractor policy and have said that it was severely damaging to the game's development. If you ask people to name their favourite Halo 3 level, you get quite a few varying answers. Some people will say the Ark for its emphasis on large-scale vehicle combat. Some will say the Covenant for its dual Scarab fight, airborne combat, and incredibly iconic, memorable story moments. And some will say Halo for its unforgettable Warthog run. But I guarantee you right now that even with a sample size of 7 billion people, nobody will ever say Cortana. Now, I'm a weirdo who doesn't outright hate Cortana, but it's kind of agreed upon as definitely Halo 3's worst level, and some might even say the worst level in the entire Halo trilogy. And you know what? Bungie agree with that sentiment. When asked about the level, Paul Bertone, who was Halo 3's lead mission designer, said, "I don't think we did great there. It's a kind of half-baked mission that needed to be there for the story, so we sort of just threw it together, but I would have preferred not to do that." So to all you Cortana haters out there, this is your moment of vindication. But what if I told you that Cortana wasn't always a terrible level? In fact, what if I told you that Cortana was almost Halo 3's greatest level? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because today we're diving into the secret and rather sad history of Halo's worst level. So, Halo 3's campaign started out a lot bigger than what we eventually got. This is, by the way, entirely normal in game dev. Even games that have the smoothest of development start out really big before being scaled back, and Halo 3 was no exception. Quite a lot of Halo 3's original campaign sadly just never saw the light of day, like, for example, the infamous Guardian Forest and Forerunner City levels, which, by the way, if you want to see me cover, let me know down below in the comments. But even levels that did make it into the final game underwent drastic changes as well, a prime example being Floodgate. Don't worry, this is all very relevant to Cortana. So, the Floodgate that we ended up getting in the final version of Halo 3 was actually an amalgamation of two separate cut Flood levels, Flood Void and Flood Ship. Flood Void mostly took the place of the Floodgate that we ended up getting. The level opened with the Flood ship crashing in Void. A veil of dust and sand rolls across the city, plunging it into an artificial dusk, lit by a dim blood-red sun. The humans become moving shadows within the pall, and other shapes now move amongst them. That's taken from the first draft of Halo 3's script, by the way, and as you can tell, the opening to the Flood's invasion of Voi was originally even more horror-focused. The level itself had some pretty big differences to the Floodgate that we know as well. Like, for example, you'd pass through a refinery, then through a refugee camp where you'd have to save some Marines from the outbreak. In fact, looking at this early blueprint of the level, it looks as though evacuating survivors was actually going to be one of the main objectives, which makes sense given the context of the level. Instead, in the version that we ended up getting, all the Marines that you see fighting the Flood quickly get infected, besides the one guy who wants to, log out of Minecraft, shall we say. But where Flood Voi really started to differ from Floodgate, however, was at the end. So as we know, Floodgate ends with you jumping into the infected ship, walking through like 3 creepy hallways, retrieving Cortana's message, and then that's it. But originally, reaching the entrance to the Flood ship was the end of the Flood Voi level, and it would lead into the next level, Flood Ship, an entire level dedicated to exploring the infected cruiser. The objective of this mission was to infiltrate the ship and retrieve Cortana's message, much like the tiny section at the end of Floodgate, but it went far, far beyond that. You also had to destroy the ship's reactors and blow it up. And you know what, funnily enough, there are still references to this objective in the final release of Halo 3. Roll it, Miranda Keys.
The Flood. It's spreading all over the city.
How do we contain it?
Find the crashed Flood ship. Overload its engine core. We either destroy this city or risk losing the entire planet.
Do it.
Chief, make your way to the crash site.
You know, until making this video, I'd never clocked the fact that Miranda tells you to do something that you never actually end up doing. I will never play Floodgate the same way ever again. The interior layout of the Flood ship was significantly larger than it was in Floodgate, which, you know, to be expected. It was basically one long, winding path through the hive. Broken messages from Cortana would hint at the Flood evolving before you'd come face to face with pure forms for the first time, making their introduction a little bit more themed and stylized than it ended up being. It's actually not very momentous at all in vanilla Halo 3. Once the ship's reactors were overloaded, the level would end with a frantic on-foot trench run that ended with Chief reaching a breach in the ship's hull, where he'd be picked up by a pelican that was full of elites, and also Johnson, who'd then take him to the Shadow of Intent for a very similar cutscene to the one that we end up getting, where the humans and elites convene, talk about Cortana, and then all tell you to subscribe to HiddenXperia right now. Smooth. Now, as of the infamous Pimps at Sea Halo 3 alpha build that was made by Bungie in 2006, both of these levels, Flood Voi and Flood Ship, still existed separately, so we don't know exactly when the decision was made to combine them, but it was likely sometime early in 2007. We also don't know why the two levels were combined either. All we know is that at some point, Flood Voi and Flood Ship were combined together to create what I'm going to coin Mega Floodgate, which, again, was very, very different to the Floodgate that we ended up getting. As its name suggests, this new Mega Floodgate was huge. It was 2 entire levels stitched together back to back, and ultimately, sadly, it proved far too long and far too poorly paced for Bungie standards, and so it was cut down by about 75%, which resulted in the Floodgate that we ended up getting. Keep all of that in mind for later on. Right, so meanwhile, on the other end of Halo 3's campaign, the team at Bungie were working on a level called High Charity, which was set to be the game's penultimate level. As the name suggests, High Charity would feature our fateful return to the flood-infected Holy City to rescue Cortana. I promise you, this is not what you think it's going to be. High Charity was a part of Halo 3's campaign from the absolute get-go, from some of the earliest drafts it seems, and as such, the level underwent a ton of prototyping in a very early version of Halo 3's engine that was built for the original Xbox. Looking at these images of these prototypes is honestly just surreal, and that puts it lightly. This is technically Halo 3 running on the same hardware as Halo 1. Fascinating. Anyway, nerdy tangent aside, eventually this build was moved over to the Xbox 360, where it still looked pretty similar, but with the major graphical improvements that you'd expect to see with the 360's hardware. Now, clearly, this is the level that ultimately ended up becoming Cortana, but as I'm sure you're all aware, Cortana in Halo 3 doesn't really resemble High Charity at all. The only room that looks vaguely similar is the Sanctum, where you rescue Cortana, and even that isn't exactly the most similar to any of Halo 2's architecture for the city. The rest of it just kind of looks like any old Covenant construct, to be honest with you. The level High Charity, however, absolutely did resemble Halo 2's take on the Holy City. In fact, it literally looks like a direct, natural extension of its design in Halo 2. Its aesthetic, its room layout, and also its visual design just look exactly the same as it did in Gravemind, but more so High Charity in Halo 2, just this time with significantly more flood. But the level's layout took this a step further. High Charity went through a ton of revisions, but one of the earliest prototypes had the level beginning in a very similar area to Gravemind in Halo 2, except this time, you know, it's a little bit more floody. You'd make your way through this part of the tower, just like you did in Halo 2, until you made it once again to the Hanging Gardens, which, again, just like Halo 2, connected the two towers. You'd cross through the Hanging Gardens before making it to the Mausoleum of the Arbiter, which is where the first of the level's pseudo-boss encounters would begin. So prepare yourself for this one. Within the Mausoleum of the Arbiter would lurk an army of flood-infected Arbiters. All of the Arbiters who died for the Covenant and were laid to rest in this room have now become undead and were turned into a boss-style encounter. Honestly, this would have been so sick. And you know, funnily enough, there's actually still a very light reference to the flood-infected Arbiters in the final release version of Halo 3. It's not much, there's just a tag in the game files that's called Flarbiters, which is obviously a shortening of Flood Arbiters, but because Bungie cut them so early on in development, nobody can unfortunately get this tag to load anything. Anyways, after you've killed all the Flarbiters, you'd reach the Prophet's Inner Sanctum, which is where you'd rescue Cortana just like in the final version of the level, which again, just like in Halo 2, would have been only a few doors away from the conduit that Chief used to board the key ship. I don't know if you were meant to use this conduit, but the fact that it's marked on the early layout for the map makes me think that you might have done something with it at least. With Cortana rescued, you'd begin your escape, which went down very differently. It was meant to end with a Scarab versus Gravemind boss fight. Yes, you heard me right. So, you'd fight back the way you came through hordes of flood until you reach the exterior of the Mausoleum of the Arbiter, where the Gravemind would suddenly appear. His putrid bulk spills from an opening below the mausoleum. His voice echoes throughout the cavernous space. Here, Cortana would spot a partially destroyed Scarab. You'd jump aboard and plug her into an access panel that was near its power core. Its rear legs and main cannon would be completely fried, but its fusion reactor would still be functional. So, Cortana would start to charge it up to use later on to destroy the Gravemind. With the Scarab's rear legs destroyed, she'd begin piloting it, but only one leg at a time, and very slowly. Each leg movement would be like quite a monumental event that she telegraphs through dialogue, and her plan with it would be to get it as close to the Gravemind as possible. The Gravemind taunts and laughs, all the while lashing out with tentacles and his minions. Now, this section was described in that first draft of Halo 3's script as a massive objective encounter. You'd ride this completely broken Scarab, fighting off hordes and hordes of flood that try and overrun you while shooting off the Gravemind's tentacles that attempt to latch onto it. Eventually, with the Scarab close enough to the Gravemind and its fusion reactor all charged up, you'd hit the core with all you've got, setting it on a detonation timer. And right as you escape, the Scarab would explode, which would pin down the Gravemind and then drop the full mass of the Mausoleum of the Arbiter on top of him. The Gravemind disappears in a great gush of fetid slime. Then Chief and Cortana would escape in a Pelican and fly to the Halo Ring. So, a boss battle against an entire army of flood-infected Arbiters, followed by another boss battle against the Gravemind where you ride a Cortana-piloted Scarab. That sounds like the coolest thing ever. What the hell happened to this version of Cortana? Well, unfortunately, this level, High Charity, was the victim of massive overambition and also a bunch of other events that, sadly, eventually led to its gutting. Halo 3's co-mission design lead left Bungie a few months before the end of development, leaving Paul Bertone to take the missions that he'd worked on that weren't finished and basically split them up between a couple other designers to complete, and Paul himself took the reins of High Charity. He said that the level was actually a lot cooler on paper than it was in practice, and that they just didn't have the resources to execute the original vision of it, and so he ended up completely gutting it and rebuilding it in about 3 weeks. Yep, you heard that right, the Cortana that we ended up getting was built in 3 weeks, very late in development. That might make a lot of sense to a lot of people. Paul went on to say, "It's a kind of half-baked mission that needed to be there for the story, so we sort of just threw it together, but I would have preferred not to do that." Such a shame how that level ended up turning out. So, how did we end up getting the version of Cortana that we got? Well, you'd assume that it was just made from the cut remnants of High Charity, right? Wrong. Cortana was essentially the Flood ship level that we talked about earlier, reincarnated. I imagine Flood ship was another one of the levels that the co-lead that had kind of worked on but hadn't finished, so when he left and Paul made all the cuts, he decided to just reuse a load of that level's geometry and rooms and encounters and such to make Cortana. I mean, hell, the frantic on-foot trench run that was described as the ending to Flood Ship is almost precisely how Cortana ends in the final version of the game. And there's even one room in Cortana that's literally the bridge of a ship, which obviously has no place on High Charity. This is, by extension, also the reason why High Charity in Cortana in Halo 3 doesn't really resemble High Charity in Halo 2 at all. Originally, it was going to be so similar that it would have felt like you were retracing your steps from the previous game, except with 1,000,000,000% more Flood, which I absolutely love, but sadly, that never came to be. In fact, as far as I'm aware, the only remnant of Halo 3's High Charity level in the game is the newly modelled Mausoleum of the Arbiter that you can see off in the distance on the other side of the lake. That same Mausoleum of the Arbiter that would have fallen and crushed the Gravemind. It's quite cool looking at that now, knowing what it was originally intended to do. According to Bungie, as Cortana was being rebuilt in those 3 weeks, the level's length was also increased by 75% to better align with the narrative stakes in the story, which makes sense because despite being a mid-level, and I say that as somebody who loves Cortana, it's a very important level narratively. I gotta say though, it is a crying shame that one of Halo 3's most ambitious and, I guess on paper, most incredible sounding levels just got reduced to one of the most disliked levels in the entire trilogy in the end, but unfortunately that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. You know, if by the grace of God Halo 3 Anniversary ever happens in any of our lifetimes, I would absolutely love for whoever's making that hypothetical game right now to dip into the archives and recreate the original version of Cortana when it was High Charity. Do it really respectfully and very much in line with Bungie's original plans and execute that original vision that Paul didn't have the resources or time to execute, because I guarantee if that was done faithfully, it would be incredible. I don't know a single person out there that would have an issue with whoever made this, again, hypothetical game, improving a level that 99% of people just don't enjoy and that sounded so much cooler in its earlier prototypes.
This game is going to ship early next year from Bungie. This is one of the coolest I've ever seen. And so I'm very happy to welcome on the stage Jason Jones, who is the co-founder of Bungie and the Halo project lead. Halo is the name of this game. And we're going to see, for the first time, Halo.
This is the first gameplay of Halo that the world ever saw. A very early and radically different version of Halo Combat Evolved debuted by Jason Jones and Steve Jobs at Macworld 1999. A version of Halo that sadly never made it into the 21st century. Or so we thought. For 24 years, it was thought to be lost, to be remembered only through vintage recordings and old magazine covers. However, today, I am very excited to share that this lost version of Halo has been found, resurrected, rebuilt, and that in mere seconds, I'm about to play it. Words that I never thought would leave my mouth. I've got to give a huge thank you to the Digsite mod team for reviving this vital piece of Halo history, along with all the other incredible long-lost Halo content that they're resurrecting. Content that we thought was lost forever, and that now we're gonna get to play. All the information about this mod can be found in the description, and also I've got to give props to 343 for officially supporting the resurrection of all of this thought to be forgotten Halo content. This is only the tip of the iceberg of what's to come, but seeing all of this stuff not just rebuilt, but playable is surreal, as you're about to experience. My friends, welcome to Crash Site. Here we go. Oh wow. See, okay, seeing that map was surreal.
Mayday! Mayday! We've been shot down and are under fire!
Dude! Oh my god! This feels surreal. Oh my god, using the early SMG. Hang on, my brain is melting. Just hold on. Just looking at this, as someone who's watched that Macworld footage probably thousands of times over the last almost 2.5 decades, being on this island just feels like utterly surreal. I don't know, man. There's just something about being on this map that feels insane to me. Just utterly insane. Using a weapon like this as well that never saw the light of day.
Here, Chief. We were on our way out of this place. We got caught out by those banshees. We lost Leto, and Oscar squad got totally wiped.
No. No, not Leto.
Look at the island, though. Covenant patrols everywhere. I can tell you right now, it ain't friendly. Round up, boys. Who's standing? Vicente, you good? Hey, Tristan ain't looking too good, man. No!
No!
Wake up, man! All right, look! We need to take ammo, scrape out the Pelican. Who has the flares? McLeese had it, man, but he bit it.
Okay, apologies if I look stunned for quite a lot of this video and just kind of sit there gorming without saying anything. This is... I don't know if I can quite put into words how utterly brain-melting it feels to be playing this level in such a faithful fashion. So I'm sorry, expect me to sit there like that a lot. What have we here? What is this? A sniper pistol? I don't even know what that is. I've never seen that before. This, I mean, I don't want to drop the SMG, but this is the AR-GL. The AR with an integrated grenade launcher, baby. The way that Bungie originally intended. And you know what it's pretty similar to? The Marathon Assault Rifle. Would you look at that? Man, oh my god, the Elite is vibing next to the Ghost. I remember that in the original gameplay. Let's take him out. Oh, it's a SOCOM. And the suppressor works. Dude, this is a cool looking pistol. Okay, let's go scout out over there. We've got a Shaderer and a bunch of Jackals and something over that hill that I couldn't see. Oh, there's a comfy little bridge. Let's try the Ghost. Oh, the armor. Yo, I just know. Hang on one damn diddly second. Look at the armor. Oh my god, that's so sick. This is surreal seeing this map in Halo 1's graphics, but not at like a super low resolution. Oh. What a comfy sound. Two incredibly comfy sounds mixed together, mind you. The overshield and the concrete. Okay, some pretty light resistance. Pretty easy to take care of. I do want to take a look at the elites. I think they are the Halo 1 elite models. I don't think they're changed to be like the early Halo 1 elites that looked a bit different. Then again, if they were, it wouldn't surprise me. Oh, the Banshee. Hello. Oh my god, he's trying to brand me. Jesus Christ. No. Banshee, what are you doing? Leave me alone. Oh my lord, that Banshee wanted a piece of me. Poor Jackal. Oh. Wrong button. And because of that, I lost my entire overshield, but who cares? Dude, using the Marathon AR, or what is basically Halo's version of the Marathon Assault Rifle in Halo, just feels so weird. Oh, that looks cool. Press E to deactivate defense shield control. So this level is basically Silent Cartographer on absolute steroids. This is the whole open world map. Very cool. Let's try something. That was so satisfying. Grunt reinforcements, poor guys. Dude, I love this environment. I really love this environment. That animation, very reminiscent of early Halo 1. I love this environment so much. This feels so mysterious and alien. There's just, you know what? I know it's a graphical thing, like an engine limitation, but that heat interrupted in the most Halo 1 way possible. God damn it, Elite. That, like, white misty haze in the distance just makes the world feel so mysterious and alien and like very Y2K to me. Very Y2K. All right, let's take camo. Let's roll out on foot. That music is beautiful, by the way. Very good. Big props. Oh, we have the SOCOM with camo. Perfect. Oh, that's comfy. Oh, I could have walked down the waterfall. Hang on. Oh, now we're talking. This is peak tier comfort. This is some like Death Stranding level of comfort. That thing is accurate. I like that. Right, let's check out this spirit. That's just such a comfy little scene. You know what? I find it even comfier that that little scene there is in like Halo 1 engine graphics and not modern graphics. I find it comfier for it being in a more minimalistic art style. I'm a sucker for Y2K stuff, and that is just like a peak example. Oh, is that a rocket hog or a gorse hog? Dude, look at Chief. Look at Orion Chief in the back. Oh, the armor's beautiful. Okay, so real quick, I'm replaying this level after recording the initial playthrough, and I've just noticed that all of the objectives are randomized. They're in different locations. That is very, very cool. You know what? I love these little stone bridges. Kind of in a little sort of way remind me of Halo 2's stone foreigner architecture. Is this just a regular Halo 1 Magnum? Oh. Okay. They didn't like me shooting in their vicinity. Oh, I gotta take the SMG. This thing's so sick. Right, hop in, Marines. This world kind of reminds me of something that you'd see in like the original Tribes game because of how big and like slopey it is. And of course how like minimal it is as well because of the year that it was made. Man, I think the last time that this was publicly played was to show off Halo 1 at Macworld with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was present the last time this was publicly played. That is like that is wild to me. That's so many eras have come and gone between now and the last time this version of Halo was publicly played. Oh, that's vibey. I like that bridge up there. I love that bridge. Let's go over that bridge. Oh, there's something over there that I like the look of as well. I want to go see that thing over there. There's so many bridges I want to look at, dude. I did not know I had such an infatuation with bridge designs, but here we are. Oh, no. Almost off the edge. Here we are. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Fast and Furious Halo 1 Macworld Edition. Jesus, that is... Ooh. Okay, well, we're already one Marine down. That's a heavy assault over there. It's so hard to drive the Halo 1 Warthog around these little hilly areas. Oh, God. Fire. Fire on the Wraith Marine, please. Oh, my Lord. Okay, right. The AR is accurate as well. Oh, my Lord. Halo 1's AR is actually accurate beyond point-blank range. Okay, we hit the switch here, and then we attack the Wraith from up above. You know, I feel like I should be playing this with a Mac. I feel like I should have bought, like, an old iMac to play this on. That is so cool, man. That grenade launch is sick. I love that. You know what? I actually would not be opposed to a variant of the AR, like in the main games that's like this, that function just like the Marathon assault rifle. Hang on. Boom! 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 Oh, hang on. Now that is satisfying. Oh, my Lord. Oh! Then we'll mop up the rest of them. Sentinels? Okay. Well, I would have preferred it if they'd attacked the Covenant, but fair enough. God, I love the Sentinels. Such comfy little fellas. Okay, let's grenade launch this thing. Oh, I have no nades left. Oh, no. Almost completely out of ammo as well. Yes, Sentinel, go. Attack the Wraith. I wonder if the Shade Turret... This might be a grave mistake. Yep, okay, that was a horrendous mistake. I should not have done that. F around and find out, I guess. Yes, Sentinels. Thank you very much for the help. And now you're attacking me. Ow. Ow, Sentinels, that hurts. Sentinels. No. That hurts quite a bit, Sentinels. Ouch. Okay, then. The area is once again clear. Let's do a little bit more exploring, shall we? Okay, take the OV. And I've seen two things that I want to go explore. There's a pipe that seems to lead somewhere underground, and also like a little spire, a little obelisk over this hill. I don't know what it is, like a little obelisk or something over here. Ooh, it looks like a crash site to me for something. Ooh, Master Chief's legs just broke. I love Halo 1's Warthog physics, man. There we go, 4th time's the charm. Right, let's have a look at what this pipe is. This is rather intriguing. I've, as you can see, lost all of my Marines once again. Ah, okay, there's still a containment field active. We can't get in there. Okay, to the next island we go then. Oh, okay, right. I'm not going to tell you guys how I managed to spawn these things. Let me just say, oh my God, there's camo elites there. Hold up 1 second. Now, I'm not going to share how I just spawned these two incredibly iconic vehicles, but let me just say, I've been exploring for quite a while. Right, so here we have the Kestrel, which was the cut UNSC air vehicle from Halo 1. Let's take it for a spin. Oh my god, it looks so cool. This thing, I believe, was canonized for the first time in like Spartan Strike or something. But oh my god, this thing is very weird to be flying. This thing looks so damn cool. Has 2 rockets, a chain gun that's incredibly powerful. That hunter got melted. Oh my god. They're like mini nukes. So long and good night, shade turret. Good god. That hunter did not stand a chance. Man, flying this thing over this map is... I've said it so many times in this video, but it is just surreal. Flying low in this thing is... Oh, that feels really cool. Flying low over the water. That is very satisfying. Right then. Let's bring it into land. Look at that for a landing. Oh my god. I should be a pilot. Kind of. Whoa. Okay, maybe not quite. And the next thing we have is the Viper tank, which was, again, the version of the Scorpion, very early version of the Scorpion, that I believe got its origins in the RTS build of Halo. Before Halo was even a first or third person game when it was an RTS, this was the tank in that version of the game, and I think this was the last version of Halo that ever had this tank, and we're driving it. We are driving the Viper. I love that crosshair too, and you know what? Let's try it out on that poor grunt in the shade turret. Oh my god. Wait, it has cluster bombs? What are they? Is that debris? Are they cluster bombs? Does this tank break the Geneva Convention? Let's keep using it and find out. Oh my god. Oh, we're about to get destroyed. It one-hit the Wraith. Oh my god, this thing is disgusting. It's also really fast as well. In fact, I'll say that. The Scorpion in Halo 1 was always pretty fast. Oh my god, you can Tokyo drift in this thing. The impact effect of the shells are insane. This thing feels more powerful than the Scorpion, to be honest with you. Scorpion's not the Viper's little baby brother. Oh my god. That explosion effect is so big. Okay, time to reverse. Reverse and fire. The shells ricochet. That is... Okay, that is very, very, very cool. Oh god. That poor Sentinel. Okay, I officially love the Viper tank. Driving through this water is so comfy. Under a big old bridge like that. I do really wish Halo originally committed to water vehicles and water physics, because I think having boats and stuff in Halo would be really sick. I've wanted that for ages. Boats and swimming in Halo I think would be really cool. Right then, this is a pretty big crater here. Oh, we have hunters, but luckily for them I have a rocket hog. Hunter, meet rocket hog. That hunter is eating these rockets. There we go. Not anymore, he's not. Okay, these are Spec Ops grunts here, which is probably a sign there's something quite large and evil. Hello! That's what it's a sign of. You know, all these years later, those camo elites still get me. Oh my god, these guys have absolutely annihilated my overshield. And there's even more dropping in over the hill. Okay, that should be the last containment field deactivated. Oh, look at the chieftain! Look at him! Oh, that looks so good. Hell, was that Johnson? That sounded like Johnson to me.
We're locked, loaded, and ready on the ground to capture the island. Stand by for special delivery.
Hell yeah.
This is Spartan Team Victor. You go ahead and secure the control.
Wait.
Take care of rescue and recovery.
Hold on, Spartan Team Victor. We got more Spartans, all right. I guess this was before Chief was the last of his kind. I want to explore more. Might drive over to where we need to go, the scenic route again. I want to go around this side of the map. Yo, wait. I need my camo to run out. Is that what I think it is? Okay, there doesn't seem to be a view model for it, but that, my friends, is the first Halo weapon that was ever shown off. The machete. Oh my god. Okay, when that eventually starts working, that is going to be insanely cool. I've wanted that thing to actually be officially added to a Halo game since probably 2003. And just seeing it in-game is very, very cool. That is the sword, by the way, the machete, that's on the legendary difficulty shield. That is the sword. Let's go this way. Up there is the crater that we cleared out initially. Let's go this way. Okay, there's the pipe that we need to go into, I think. Oh, the Pelican crashed. There's definitely some kind of large-scale battle going on there, though. Oh, no, there was. Spartan Team Vict. Dude, the Spartans all wearing this kind of Orion Mjolnir. What? Right, whatever that assault rifle is, I need it right now. That looks so damn cool. I know I really shouldn't do this. That is such a cool look. Oh my god. Oh, hang on. I may not need to kill them. The minigun! Oh my god, the minigun! Oh, baby. The minigun and the flamethrower. Oh, this bad boy. Oh, dude, look how sick it looks. That AR, though. That AR looks gorgeous. I kind of hope one of these Spartans dies so I get to try the AR. If not, I will have to take one out. I can already hear lots. Oh, dude, these tunnels. Oh, my God. Yo, what is going on in here? Hello. This is cool. Oh, my God. This... Oh, I am a fan of this. Oh, that feels good. Those Spartans with the blue shields look so sick as well. Minigunning a Wraith feels... Oh, that feels so sick. The heat bar as well. Look at the UI element for the heat bar. That's so cool. Burn. Oh, that's what I'm about. Oh my god. This is so cool, man. I can't believe I'm playing this. To build themselves a little concrete fort. Spartans? Hold up. Hold up. Oh! Oh my god, it's the early elites! The elites I was talking about earlier! They are here! And the only thing left to do to them is burn them. I don't know what this thing is, I don't understand it, and thus I must burn it. Or tear it down with a minigun. Oh my god, those things are agile. Holy shit. Dude, that's so insane. Look at them. Those elites look really cool. They actually... I know I always talk about Turok Evolution, but they do kind of look like Slag Troopers from Turok Evolution. You can't deny that. I love that little, like, soundtrack piece playing as well. Very mysterious. So we go through here. Oh my god, that's so cool seeing a waving for you. Got that NPC wave. Oh, such mystery. Oh, that is such a cool level, man. Oh. Oh, it's not done. With the dig site flag that was once the Bungie flag. That's okay. That's cool. I love that. That's really, really cool. Okay, so the dig site team released something else after Crash Site that lets us experience even more content from the Macworld build. You are not going to believe what we're about to see. So, my friends, welcome. Oh my god. Okay, this is already quite crazy. Welcome to what's called Spasm, which is their test map where they've got all of not just the original Spartan models and Elite models usable, but the old Covenant snipers and the goddamn Drinol are here. Oh, and they're already attacking me. Okay, so first off, let's just talk about this big guy here. This is the Drinol or Sharkoi or Driniol from Marathon. As you can see, he's a very big, heavy, bulky boy. Oh, there they are. Okay, so that boy was obviously cut from Halo 1 and then cut from Halo 2, and he's canon, but never been seen before in a game until now. And wow, that thing is a staple of like this build of Halo, and actually seeing it in game is crazy. And then we have, as you can see here, the old Covenant snipers, which were never in Halo 1. He has a sniper rifle of some kind. I'm gonna have to kill him because he's gonna kill me. But as you can see, they don't look anything like any other form of Covenant. Obviously, they became oh, good god. Obviously, they became the Jackal Snipers in Halo 2, but man, I gotta say, this kind of weird species, we still don't know what they're called, what species they are. They're about to kill me. Very Jackal Sniper-like, but they look very, very cool, and I honestly would love to see them canonized and actually added to a game in the future, because they're like armored with metal. They almost look like they're made out of like Golo worms. So yeah, I'd love to see these guys actually get added to a game, along with that sniper as well. I mean, it's like an early beam rifle, but it looks very, very cool. Okay, let's try and take down a Sharkoi. Now, as you can see here as well, we'll take a deeper look at this in a second, but we have a lot of weapons that were cut from Halo 1 that were only ever in, again, the Macworld build to play around with. You know what? Let's go in from the top. Let's start off with an energy sword. A third-person energy sword. Let's kill as a Sharkoi with a third-person energy sword. Oh my god. That sounds weird. Well, it has no actual hit effects, but it sure as hell cuts through a Sharkoi. These weapons, oh my god, the gravity wrench. I don't know what this thing was meant to do. Oh, okay, that's what it does. Now, I think because none of these weapons have first-person view models, they're all going to be in third person. This is another version of the assault rifle, which I've never seen before. This appears to be some kind of early AR SMG. Nope, it's a grenade launcher, apparently. Fair enough. This one I'm very excited for. This is the gravity rifle. If you remember a while back when I covered Combat Evolved Plus, they'd included this thing in that. I love the crosshair. The like 3D crosshair. That's really cool. I don't know what this thing actually does, but it looks cool when you fire it. It like spins around. Oh, this is the early version of the Spanker. Very similar to the Marathon rocket launcher, as with a lot of these weapons. Their designs are very similar in this early version to Marathon. Not much very different about this. It's a more kind of standard, almost like Stinger looking version of the Spanker. Sounds quite cool when you fire it. You also top load it as well. What the? You look like an RPG from the top. Oh, this thing. I think, you know, I don't even know what this is. It's like a bolt pistol or something? It fires one shot and then overheats. I am not even going to pretend to know what this thing is. Does not even look like a weapon. What is that thing? Golden fuel rod gun. It's a fuel rod gun that fires rockets very fast. It's fully automatic. Okay, well, maybe it's a good thing that was never added to the game. Oh my god. Oh, that's like the Marathon shotgun. The little one. It's got the same fire rate. Okay, interesting. Of course, that's the SMG. This is the early plasma rifle, which, oh, has a lot of recoil. Oh, the bolt action sniper rifle, baby, that isn't in third person. You know what? I really, really, really want Halo to get a bolt action rifle. I think a bolt action would be so sick in an actual Halo game. The excavator, which again was in CE+, sounds very cool. I like the sound of that. This thing, what the hell is this? Oh, the Covenant sniper. This is the early beam rifle. It's what the sniper Covenant we're using over there. This is the early Halo 1 version of the beam rifle. And you know what? I actually think I prefer that design to the beam rifle. Maybe it's a grass is always greener kind of scenario, but that looks very cool. What is that? Is that like a nail gun or like a screwdriver? Oh no, it's a harpoon gun. Oh my god, the harpoon gun. That's very fitting considering over there we have Halo's only ever functioning boat, at least in a build that we've played. Well, I don't really know what the harpoon would have been used for, unless there were going to be sea enemies. Like, hang on, it's an explosive harpoon. Yep, it's an explosive harpoon. Okay, that's quite cool. Oh, this is the gravity gun. Okay, this is the gravity gun that we used in Combat Evolved Plus, which is very, very cool. Like a charge up, one-hit kill kind of thing. You can't see it here. However, the model for this thing is very, very cool. So many early versions of the plasma rifle. Oh, the hologram counter on the side. Or the hologram iron sights even. I love that look. Another version here that has a charge up. Oh my. Well, never seen that one before. A third person one, which don't know the difference. Oh, this is the bow action sniper rifle, I think. Yes. Okay, I don't know what the hell that is. That looks like a WA-2000. There's so many weapons here. Oh, a red rocket launcher. Right then. Okay, these seem to be very early weapons from when Halo wasn't even a first-person game. I think that's why the crosshairs are 3D. They're meant for like third-person targeting, and obviously a lot of these weapons were designed when Halo was a third-person shooter, not a first-person shooter. Oh, how could I forget? The old flamethrower that is literally just, from what I can tell, the Marathon flamethrower. That makes the Banshee sound. Quite cool. The machete, baby. Oh, there's two machetes. And yeah, this is a Kukri, and this is just a good old-fashioned legendary shield machete. Very cool. I really want this thing in the game at some point. Okay then, let's go and take a look at some of these cut vehicles. Starting off with the most cut vehicle of all Halo cut vehicles ever. The motorboat, which you can apparently sit in the back of. This thing barely works, goes very, very slow. Obviously, it only works in water. This was, again, back when Halo was a third-person shooter, or honestly, this may even be a leftover from when Halo was an RTS originally, when it was going to have water combat. This was, as you can tell, because it's a motorboat meant to be used on water, but Halo's never had that. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. I really, really, really want like water-based combat with boats and swimming in Halo at some point. I think that'd be sick. We have the different versions of the Hog, the regular troop Hog, very cool, heavily shielded minigun Hog, M134 I think it is, and then the rocket Hog that we already used. We have the early version of the Shadow, the Covenant bus from Halo 2, which it's weird driving this thing full stop, let alone in Halo 1. And you know what, funnily enough, it actually feels nicer to drive in Halo 1 than it does when you mod it into Halo 2. It feels more responsive. And then finally, we have, of course, the Halo 1 version of the Spectre, which, I'm sat in the passenger seat. Passenger seat's right at the front. Interesting. So yeah, this was obviously the Covenant version of the Warthog that we got in Halo 2, but this is the Halo 1 version that you'll see again in like E3 2000, E3 1999 as well, I believe, builds of Halo 1. Very similar to the Spectre that we eventually got. Not quite as cool as Halo 2 Spectre. Halo 2 Spectre holds a very special place in my heart, but this thing is still very cool and very, very nippy. Goes quite fast. Oh, and look at that. You can fly the Pelican as well. Oh, wow. That actually, you know what? That feels really nice to drive. I'm quite surprised how intuitive this feels for a vehicle that was never even remotely made to be driven.